What I thought we would do is similar to what we did at one of the other meetings, which I thought was very productive. We're going to start out for 1 hour. We're going to go until 7 o'clock, and we're just going to treat this as a work session to keep things informal. And so we'll just kind of treat this as a conversation while we're going through the budget, kind of brainstorming the budget, trying to figure out where we need to go. And then we'll reassess things at 7 o'clock and see if we're ready to go into committee to go ahead and get some action done. But again, we'll just kind of keep this very informal. I'll still try to navigate, try to coordinate where we're not talking over each other, but for the most part, I just want to kind of keep the discussion going. Mr. Parliament, I guess one thing we need to do first is kind of go down memory road a little bit, and so that we can get kind of an update of what we've discussed in the past, and we can kind of come forward till today. And the one thing I wanted you to do first is if you could bring up the master spreadsheet that we looked at our May 9th meeting. It looks like you've already got that up. All right, and so looking at that particular spreadsheet that we looked at on May the 9th, if you'll scroll down to expenditures. All right, so with that budget that we were looking at on May 9th, you all were showing a proposed draft budget of $98.3 million total in expenditures, which represented about a $6.7 million increase of what we budgeted last year. Now, I had requested to get a breakdown of what that $6.7 million, what that was made of. And I think you had a tab that was part of that May 9th meeting for the GP increases. And that gave a breakdown of what that roughly $6.8 million was made of. And you all had listed the keys items from the GP column of $1.3 million. Step raises of almost $1 million, salary increases of around almost $1.2 million, extra instructional staff, y'all got down $578,000, additional teaching positions, you all had allocated about $1.2 million, extra nurses, almost $100,000, extra bus drivers, around $300,000, and extra administrative staff was $100,000, and health insurance increase was $842,000. All right, so since then, though, have you all went back and you've looked at your numbers? Do you all need to make some revisions to what was included in that $6.8 million?
Yes. The starting point on the $6.8 million, when we went back and started going through with the direction from the board last meeting, we realized that the $1.4 million in the general purpose keys column was not in that budget number. It was not in the $98,307,000, with the exception of the 4 related arts positions that we were tasked with putting in there a month or so ago.
All right, so going back to that breakdown again. All right, so where you all had at the last meeting, it was showing that all the $1.4 million was in that $6.8 million increase. You're saying that is not, that's been updated. That was not included in that 6.8.
Only about $260,000 was in there.
Okay. So about $1.2 million was not in the 6.8.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, what about some of the other items? The salary increase, was that included in the 6.8?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And all those other items were included?
Yes.
Okay. Because if we recall from our May 9th meeting, one of the things that we talked about was funding the increases, the salary increases, but then having them go back and we would reduce the local tax revenue back to what it was previously. And maybe we need to go back down memory road just a little bit more. If you'll go look at the master spreadsheet. All right, when you all presented this on May 9th, it had local taxes of $39 million.
That's correct. It had an additional $995,000 in there to cover the $38 million in expenditures that we had.
Okay. So when we were looking at this on May 9th, when we were looking at the local taxes, you all had increased that local tax line $4,000 by almost $1 million.
Correct.
above what we had looked at on May 2nd.
That's correct.
Okay. So when we were back again, going back to May 9th, we thought that all the salary increases were already in there, the GP or the Keys budget was already in there. We were just going to go back and reduce that local tax line back to what it was before and ask the director's office to find cuts, to be able to find cuts of about $1 million. Well, that was when we were only trying to find $1 million. But because you all did not have that Keys included in this budget that we looked at, it was actually a bigger swing than that.
That's correct.
Okay, so if we went back to the old revenue, that's about $1 million swing, and then to find the
1.2
to cover all the million,
Right.
that's total of about $2 million to find.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so I just think that we need to go over that and kind of refresh our recollection of what was presented to us before and get an understanding of what we're looking at now. So I think that's maybe a little bit different scenario and a little bit different way of trying to figure things out than what was looked at before. So with that, let me open the floor and see if anybody has any questions or discussions about all of that. Ms. Kinzer.
What percentage is our budget, total budget? What percentage of it is for our employees that, benefits 50%, 60%, what percentage?
Straight salaries is probably about 60%, and then you add benefits on top of that. So probably 70% in rough neighborhood.
Okay, so 70% of our budget
is
should be
salaries
for
and
salaries
and related benefits,
for
yes.
all of our employees.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the mill rate that we received today. You're talking about a total of about $865,000, $900,000, I think. So 70% of that should go to teacher salaries, or to our employees. And let me just go through it. Increased sales tax revenue, so whatever that is, 70% of that should go to our employees. Attrition is something we talked about the other day, and you gave me a figure of about 60 retirees, and you can pretty much multiply $10,000 that we can hire somebody at least $10,000 less. So that's $600,000 that we would have to use for teacher salaries. Because we're going to either hire them at beginning or in middle or something, but we're not going to hire somebody that's put in 30 or 40 years, I don't think. And there may be more retirees. So that's another $600,000 that should only go to teacher salaries. The BEP, $1,900,000, all of that should go to teacher salaries. And then the local revenue increase that they said of 3%, I really think that ought to be put back in there, and 70% of that should go to teacher salaries. And there's one other thing. In 2006, we had the same thing happen, that they took some money away from us because we had, because of our at-risk students. And because of that, we lost some money. So they chose to take that $1 million out of fund balance to try to offset that. It was a one-time thing. It was a precedent. It has been done. Now, I don't know, I'm not a accountant, but I can pretty much add up and see that there's an awful lot of money that needs to be spent just on teacher salaries. I don't think 2% is enough. I'm sorry. I don't. And another thing, and let me just put it out there, I know y'all don't want me to do all the talking tonight. I want to hear what you all have to say. But you say we need 16 extra positions. I don't doubt that, and I know that when we open a new school, it's really, we need to have those so that we can. But you're not going to hire them the first day of school. You're not going to hire them in August. You may not hire them till October, and you may not hire them at all. So I would rather address that as needed. So that would be a huge part of the budget that could go to teacher salaries. That's what I'd like for y'all to consider.
And I'll make one correction on that. When you ask me the total salaries, that is all employees. That's not just teachers.
And I said all employees.
Yeah,
I think
so
I said
that
it every time.
70%
All
is
employees.
all
Oh,
employees.
I'm talking for all.
Okay,
I mean, there isn't bus drivers,
okay,
teaching assistants, they're all important to the system.
okay.
All right, so let's go back to the big picture, and then we can get into the details to try to figure out, do we do some increases on some of the expenditures like salaries? If we do those increases, how are we going to pay for that? Are we going to reduce other expenditures, or are we going to increase revenue somewhere? But I do think we need to kind of first, again, see the big picture of where we stand now, looking at some of these, with some of these adjustments. So if you can pull up the master spreadsheet that you all have prepared for tonight. It should be.
So they're updated there as well as the email.
For this purpose, you can pull up version A.
All right, so looking at that bottom line, if we can go to the bottom line of expenditures, you all now have total expenditures of $99.5 million. Okay, now that's an increase from what we looked at on May the 9th. May 9th, it was $98.3 million. And Mr. Parliament, if I understand correctly, the reason that you all have increased that is to cover the keys
That's correct.
in the green column,
That's
which we
correct.
thought had been covered before, but now it's included.
And it's also taking out the additional revenue, which we were tasked to do,
Okay,
the
so-
995,000 of additional revenue.
All right, so let's look at that real quick. So 99.5 million, and just real quick, let's look at the breakdown again. If you can show the breakdown. Now, that's an increase of $8 million more than last year.
And I have not broken down that increase like we did for the previous meeting.
Okay. And I may have some additional questions. Other committee members may have some additional questions about that. But now, again, let's go back to the master real quick. And if you go down to the bottom, our expenditures. So if we look at column J, that's showing that budget would increase above last year of $8 million.
Correct.
All right, so let's try to figure out what that $8 million is. Again, let's look at the breakdown. Now, you have all those things listed again, but it has not been updated that what should also be added, or had not been added before, is the keys items, the 1 point. Well, it's about 1 point, how much?
Probably a little under 1.2 that was not in there.
All right, so I'm still trying to figure out, I can see the breakdown here that gets up to 6.8. I guess if the keys was not in and now it's being added, I guess I've still got some questions about what's the additional $1 million going
Right.
towards? Can you give us a little bit of understanding of that?
We didn't break it down like this. I didn't have time to come up with this to go from the 6.8 to the 8. I tried to use the categories that you kind of threw out there. More than it is spread over a lot of different things. They're not big hits. They're not $500,000 here. It's a lot of stuff that's spread out.
Okay. All right, so again, let's go back to the master real quick. All right, so total expenditures, 98.5, that's with the keys now included in the green column. And if we go back up to the revenue, you all, as the committee requested last time, you all adjusted the revenue back down to what it was previously.
That's correct.
So that gives us revenue of $97.3 million. So we're about $2.2 million short,
That's correct.
as it stands right now. Okay, now that includes, what we're looking at right now includes that includes a 2% raise
Yes.
for all employees.
Yes.
Includes all the keys.
Yes.
In the green.
Includes the nurses, includes the additional bus drivers.
Yes.
Includes all those things. but we're still $2.2 million short.
That's correct.
All right, so just the problem we have right now is a $2.2 million problem. We've got to either figure out how to adjust the revenue side of things, we go back and we add some things back to revenue, or we take some things out of our expenditures.
And we were tasked, when we went back and sat down and got to this point, we agreed with the general statement last week that to ask for more revenue than what we've got here is probably not likely to happen. So we went at it totally not thinking about upping the revenue number, but trying to find that $2.2 million in the GP budget or the Keys budget.
Well, I mean, I think from a committee standpoint, all options are on the table, and that's something what we're going to have some discussion about, of how to fix that $2.2 million hole. Now,
But we were trying to think about what were the likeliest things to happen when we got to presenting this
okay.
to county commission, so.
Now, what Ms. Kinzer brought up a minute ago about the county, the penny rate, how the county gives us property tax. What is the total top property? It's $2.81 per $100. Is that roughly right? So they take that $2.81, and that's how they look at everything. They break it down to pennies. This department gets so many pennies of that $2.81, another department gets that, and the school system gets the majority of that. If they continue to provide the same percentage of that tax base, it looks like because of appraisals and things like that, that penny is worth more than it was last year. Okay, which they call the mill rate. I don't know, but they love talking about pennies. I tell you. So anyway, if you'll go to the revenue section, Mr. Parliament, that tab, the revenue tab that gives a breakdown. All right, so what we currently have in our budget, you'll see under column K for current property tax is $21.9 million. Based upon the county looking at their assessment rate, what our same penny will be worth next year, what they estimate is that it will be an increase, our total property tax to us will be around $22.1 million. So that's about $195,000 difference than what we've currently have budgeted. So that's $195,000 that we can find that go in the pot, potentially. Okay? Now, another potential that we could look at is local option sales tax, and you'll see that we are currently budgeting $4.9 million for property tax. Now, Mr. Parliament, I asked you to do some estimates based upon the trends over the last 10 years, and I guess, do you have that? I know that you were going to make some work on that.
So this is basically taking actual property tax and actual local sales tax over the last 10 years. What you see in column O is where we are at now, what we're planning on budgeting based upon this year's revenue. What Mr. Bates has asked that I do is take the 10-year average and take that on top of what we know is coming in this year. Take that on top of the 16-17 estimated and come up with a revenue number. So that's what's in column P right there. If you take the 10-year average times the 21,978.
All right, so just where you all can follow along, if you look at column N, what Mr. Parliament is estimating is what's going to come in sales tax this year is around $15 million. Now, in my humble opinion, I think that's probably low, but I'm deferring to Mr. Parliament, and I'm always going to defer to Mr. Parliament, so I'll defer to our professionals. So we're going to roughly get about $924,000 more in sales tax revenue this year than we did last year. Estimating out for next year, for 17-18, if we take what we got this year, and if we try to project out in the future of just 5%, that would actually mean for 17-18 we would get around $15.7 million, Mr. Parliament?
That's correct.
All right, so Right now, we're conservative. We're using a very conservative figure for a 17-18 budget of the 14.9. And that's basically what we were using as an estimate for next year was just an assumption of a stagnant economy. Okay, so that estimate would be assuming the economy just completely flatlined. We got $14.9 million this year. If it flatlines, we should expect we would get around $14.9 million next year. That's probably not the case. You know, based upon the historical data, it's actually increased year after year after year. Last year, it increased 11%, our sales tax above the previous year. And the year before that, it increased 5.3%, and the year before that it increased by 6.72%. So 5% seems to be a pretty conservative figure. So if we wanted to, we could look at that as an additional way of maybe finding some additional funding. So that's roughly what, 700,000?
That's 700 on sales tax and
And then if we use
700 on property tax. So that's about 1.4 million.
well, let's see. So on property tax, I think if we use the rate that they're using projecting out next year, that was a difference of about an extra 200,000 what we
so
already budgeted.
About 900,000 if you put the two together. 700 for sales tax and the 200 for.
What will throw us off a little bit is, so that budgeted number that they were using already included some increase from last year. Okay? What the new information that we got from the county shows that even our estimate was maybe an underestimate by about 200,000. So we could actually increase or adjust that figure by about another 200,000. So we got potentially, if we use the county's property tax rate, their estimate for next year, that's about 200,000. If we went with, I think would still be a conservative figure for next year, there's probably, we could adjust by about 700,000 on the sales tax. So that's a total of about 900,000 that we could look at from a revenue standpoint, or we could increase it even more. But when we do that, from a county standpoint, when they look at that, if that money does not come in naturally, they have to bring it in unnaturally. And that means that they increase the rate. Okay, and so that's where whenever you get above what they are estimating will come in, leaving the rate alone, that's where they start hyperventilating, they start getting heartburn. Doesn't mean that goes with the job. If that's what we think that there's sufficient needs, but we could get into that territory. Me personally, I mean, that's the territory that I would personally prefer not to be in, hoping that we weren't going to be in this anyway, but we've had some curveballs that have been thrown at us, but it is what it is. So we just have to tackle it the best we can. But even if we look at these numbers, that's about 900,000. You all are saying that to fund the 2% raise and the keys and all those other things that we just looked at, we need about 2.2. So we're still short by about 1.3 then.
Correct.
Okay.
Dave?
Yes, Mr. Moore.
Just a real quick question on that. Just for my information on this, what is the sum total for a 2% raise? What was it again?
It's changing as we add those positions in and out because it's calculated on those positions.
Just a ballpark number. I'm not looking for exact.
Right now, about little over 1.2 million.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so there's potential revenue things that we could look at. There's also potential expenditure cuts to look at. And I think you all were before, it looked like we thought we were looking at maybe about $1 million, looking at some things to do some cuts. Now it's potentially got into the 2.2. That would be if we didn't add some revenue.
Correct.
But you all went through and looked at some things as far as what cuts we would make to reach 2.2. So I'm just going to turn that over to you all, and you all can explain what y'all have come up with.
Okay, we sat down last week after Tuesday night, and once we realized that the Keys dollars were not in there, we added all the positions that were listed in the green column of the Keys budget. We went into the spreadsheet and added those in. And that was our starting point for trying to come up with the 2.2 million that you see here. So what we did was we started with the GP budget, and we basically went around the table and we came up with areas where we thought, and a lot of this, we changed our focus from let's kind of build in some cushion and make sure we've got some things there to let's go back now that we are starting a process of reviewing our financials on a monthly basis and going into detail and talking about this. Let's skinny this thing down and put out there, this is exactly what we think is going to happen, barring unforeseen circumstances. So I'll let Stan can speak a little bit to this, but some of those were coming from Stan. We decided to reduce the utilities increase from 3% to 2%. That's basically betting on the fact that we're not going to have an unusually harsh winter and we're not going to have some of those things, coupled with increased efficiencies in equipment that's going into the schools. So he felt comfortable with dropping that from 3% to a 2% increase, which resulted in about $40,000. Same with the natural gas. Based upon historical data over the last couple of years, he felt comfortable with reducing that amount that was in the budget by $100,000. And again, some of these still leave a little bit of room for things to happen.
Now, every time you say this, I need like a little gold star to give to Stan, okay?
He bled a lot. He bled a lot during these conversations.
We need to hand out stickers, so.
If I can speak to that, and this is working, but what we did was looked at the past few years. It's not working. The past few years, battery may be dead. We have, when you get into utilities, we've experienced a couple of mild winters, but we've also made a lot of energy improvements with what Train is doing. And so I've got to give you the caveat with, we always try to be a little bit fat on things like utilities and fuel. We talk about fuel for the bus because you never know what's going to happen. You know, there is some unknown there. We could have the worst winter in the history of Murray County this year. We have no way. So if we hit one of those, we may have to come back to you and say, this just, you know, it was an unusual circumstance. Because I don't know if you all remember, but I went back and pulled these numbers just quickly. I know I'm interrupting, but when I began in the winter of 2014, we experienced a hard winter. If you remember, fuel prices kind of went out the roof. It's the supplier who was supplying our propane said, we can't supply you. We also had some problems with some equipment, but that year we spent $756,000 on gas. The next year, because of efficiencies we made, changes, that dropped to $450,000. Last year we spent $230,000, and this year looks like we're going to spend about $200,000. Now that's real money right there. That it's gone, but we could have another harsh. I don't think it'll ever go back to $700,000 again, but it might go back to $400,000. So we're dropping the budget from what we originally were projecting about $450 down to about $350.
And just real quick, if we did get into a situation where maybe it's a worse winter than what we anticipated, we could look at other budgets and we can do a budget transfer on things like that. And then also, this is one of the reasons why the state mandates that we keep a rainy day fund of 3% always on the go for situations like that, that we could look into either the 3% or other fund balance that we might have available.
And you won't have to transfer that money while it's happening because that budget will still continue to run throughout the year. So if it does get rough and Stan says, it looks like I'm going to run out about April, then around January, February, that's when we can start to either do the budget transfers or the fund balance transfer to get him all the way from May to June 30th. So it's not like you'd have to do it like right then.
And the other thing you'll remember a few years ago, we were spending, fuel prices were way up. Well, we were budgeting, at one time we budgeted $3.50 a gallon. About 3 years ago, we cut that to $3 a gallon. We haven't spent $3 a gallon since then, or that year. In the last 6 months, we have averaged $1.65 on diesel, $1.83 for, and that's for the diesel we're getting through the county at the county garage. We've averaged $1.83 for the gas we're buying for our fleet cars, and we've averaged $1.64 for the diesel we're putting in our outlying tanks at our schools for our remote budget. So about $1.65, $1.83. So again, we're cutting the budget from $3 to $2.50, but you know, there could be a war in the Middle East or something, and fuel prices would go up. But and you can see we're buying wholesale. You know, we don't pay what everybody's paying at the pump. Same thing on gas, propane. I know if you're like me, I have a propane tank at home. I pay anywhere from $2.39 to $2.89 to fill it. At the same time, the schools we're buying it for about 90 cents a gallon because we bid and we buying it. So.
Right.
I probably need to speak to the next two. We had proposed on the parent responsibility zone on buses of reducing that. If you'll remember, when Eric Perriman presented that to us, we could reduce that from 1.5 miles to 0.5 mile by adding 5 additional buses. We could reduce it from 0.5 mile down to 0 by adding 2 more. So we're proposing to cut those last 2 and just reduce it from 1.5 miles down to 0.5 mile. So that saved the 2 bus driver salaries, $44,000. Now, it also would take 2 buses out of the capital request, which we have not gone back and adjusted, but we would need to do that. Then the last one is, last year we took some of our tubes and tires and bought those out of the fund balance money. That is how much we had projected as an increase in this year's budget for tubes and tires because of new buses and those kind of things. So we would propose taking that money out of fund balance. Still need that, but take that out because that could be done as a one-time purchase. The next one, the phones, we've had a transition in our phones over the last few years because we used to get E-rate funding for phones. They quit doing that, so we've had to take on that cost. We did that by just our provider, E&A. We use voice over internet phones. So our provider of our internet is providing the phones and providing the equipment for the phones. Well, what we're looking at is purchasing our own phone system and bringing those phones in-house. We believe we can save $60,000 by doing that. So that's all of mine, I think.
So on the science tech books, we have been looking at, as we transition to one-to-one, we've been looking at digital textbooks as a means in the transition, and we looked at math and science and social studies. So we looked at that textbook line as being the funding source for those 3 tech books, if you would. We went back, and as we piloted it this year, we piloted science, and we looked at the connections that we could do, and especially not only science is the only tech book that's K-12. So we decided that we would only purchase a science tech book this year, and that 6-year cost is somewhere around $70,000 per year. So that's where we took that amount. We still leave about $20,000 because we always have we have different advanced placement classes and those things like that we can't, we may not need, 100 textbooks, but we may need 25 for an advanced placement class. So we would have that $20,000 to be able to purchase textbooks for those advanced placement classes. So we were able to reduce that amount by $50,000 to put into the budget. The second one, the PDPLC, we continue.
Before we go to that, we may have some questions about the science tech textbooks. So I don't know if I'm quite following it. So the $50,000, what will we not be purchasing?
Well, what we would have either tried to purchase a math textbook or, but it didn't. Math textbook is only available in grades 6 through 12. So we wanted to try to have a textbook that we were able to provide from K to the 8th grade is what we were trying to look at. So.
So basically, what we wouldn't purchase would be the science tech book.
Well, what we wouldn't purchase would be the math textbook. We were purchasing the science textbook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Only purchase science. Yeah.
So we would not get a math tech or the social studies tech. And who usually gets that? The teachers or the students?
We actually, it's a subscription for each student, so all the students would have them.
So basically, look at it this way. What the tech book is, it is, normally a textbook is very linear, page 1, page 2, page 3, and it goes in a progression. The tech book is more or less, it's more like an interactive website that has interactive information around the science standards that the students have to learn. So they can use it on any computer, they can use it on any phone, it's device agnostic, and so basically gives video, text, interactivity, all different kinds of things around the science continuum. So they've won just a couple awards because it's very innovative. When you go to more digital books, sometimes they're PDFs.
So is it that we're saying that from a digital standpoint, we're going to have the resources where we don't have to purchase the physical book? Is that how we're
Yes.
saving the $50,000?
Yes.
Okay. So it's part of going digital. We get a little bit more where we can save some money.
Right.
Okay. All right. All right. Sorry. I just
So,
wanted to.
and
get some
then the next
clarification.
item, and looking at our PD costs, of course, we always want to, one of the things we had in our TEL survey as a district was, across the district, was following up with PD. So that was one of the things we looked at in particular this year, and we actually had budgeted to do some follow-up with it. You know, we went to St. Louis last year with our professional learning community coaches and did some training. So we had actually budgeted an event that would take place coming up as soon as we get out of school. So we looked at some opportunities where we could do it earlier, and it would be like a one-time purchase. So we took that money out of the budget and said, hey, we could probably do it this year out of fund balance and try to go ahead and do that event early on in June. So it's just a one-time professional development follow-up where it's a 2-day conference, similar to the one where we went to St. Louis, except we're actually going to host a conference here.
So instead of paying it at a general purpose, we would pay that at a fund balance.
Right.
Okay. All right. And then the sub payroll.
Yeah, the next one is pending the approval of that proposal to outsource sub payroll. That would be the savings in-house on drug screens, background checks, those types of things.
But the total cost would actually be a little more than what we're paying right now. But you're saying some of the budgets, though, we can reduce because we're no longer having to handle those sorts of
Right,
things.
you're going to increase your salary line for subs.
Okay.
But that's a software system that's about $14,000 now a year. They'll take over, and then about $10,000 for background checks and drug screens.
Okay.
So when we started talking about
Just a
the-
second, Mr. Parley. I think Ms. Powers had a question.
So that's doing subs in-house and no longer subbing it out? Or if we sub it with?
No, that's if we outsource the subs.
So we're taking that out of the way we've always done it for drug screens and background checks?
Right. They'll cover the costs. They'll actually absorb those costs, so it'll be a savings to us.
Okay. The next line item, the $800,000, comes from a couple of different things that we talked about. As Scott and the group started looking at historically how we've done budgets, I think, and I'm relying a lot on his knowledge of that. But in the past, I think we never budgeted teacher salaries person by person by person, this year was the first time we did that. We have spreadsheets by school, by person, where we calculated salaries, retirement benefits, insurance, and everything else. So we had a number that we could tie to person by person by person. In the past, my understanding was that they kind of looked at what the trend was, what it was last year, and said, okay, let's add a % or two to that to make sure we build in some cushion. And I think over the last 2 or 3 years, that number kept rising and rising and rising. We talked about that and coupled with the fact, and I think Ms. Kinzer brought this up, knowing that anytime you have a position leave and you bring somebody in, you're going to gain more than likely dollars on that position. So we came up, based upon historical data and that thought process, about $800,000 that we could cut out of the teacher's salary line item.
I guess the only thing that some question in my mind is the future. From a long-range planning standpoint, I know we're getting ready to build these new schools. We're going to have to staff those schools. I just want to make sure that we're not being, looking at things on a short-term basis without looking at the long-term, that maybe we don't need that right now, but we know 2 or 3 years we're going to need it. Can you all give me some feedback on that?
And I think the thought process was, as we get to that point where you have a new school and you have to add X amount of teachers, I mean, you've got the legitimate reason for doing that, and you'll do that on a person-by-person basis instead of just going, we need to add an extra 2% to this line item to cover us, and not really having anything to base that on. So I think as you move forward year to year, you're going to be looking at that person-by-person and need-by-need versus just throwing a number out there blindly, which I think has been what's happened.
Okay. All right.
The next one is 64,000. When we went through the reason for the GP increases, we added an additional 16 positions that was required from the BEP estimate from the state. Traditionally, we were calculating that as a $45,000 salary plus benefits, and we kept throwing 65,000 out there as a round number. I went back, and on the 4 related arts positions, when I added those into the budget, I actually calculated what the retirement, what the benefits would be, and it came up to 61,000 average instead of 65. So we went ahead and picked up that $4,000 savings times the 16 positions that we added. And then Stan, you want to speak to the workers' comp?
Last year, if you remember, we rebid all of our insurance, and we received we have not got our renewal premiums on any of our insurance this year. On our property and casualty insurance, what we did is we upped our budget by 2%, which is what they told us to estimate. We haven't got work comp, though it's obviously tied to payroll, but they've said that we shouldn't expect a rate increase. Well, last year when we rebid it, we received about $100,000. What we have now is $100,000 less than we had budgeted and spent the year before. So we had not taken that out of the, we just found that got missed and taken out of the budget. We had left the budget the same as last year, and we underspending by about $100,000. So because we didn't know exactly how much it's going to go up, we just took $75,000 off of that.
And so, Mr. Parliament, it looks like those are like things that are part of the GP. What is the total of all those items?
$1,445,818.
So around 1.4, almost.
Right.
Okay.
So of the 2.2 that we were looking for, we were able to find the 1.4 in the GP budget.
Okay. So if we stop there, if we went back and increased some of those revenue items by about 900,000, and if we made these reductions, which is about 1.4, that would cover.
That's correct, with a little bit of extra.
Okay. But then if we want to add some additional raises, then we got to either go back to the revenue side, or we're going to have to make some additional reductions. So you all have also included some additional reductions. So let's go through those of some possibilities of what could be reduced.
Okay, what we did was we sat down and looked at the Keys budget and everything that was in the green column. And this list, and again, Dr. Marzak can speak to this, but this is what each school came to us and said, this is what we would like to have. When we started talking through this list is prioritized. So the 77,000 was what the group thought was the easiest thing to let go of. And I'm not sure that's the right way to put it, but that's what they would choose to let go of first, down to the bottom of the 32.5 of this is what we would least like to lose. So, and what we've done is we've highlighted the Keys budget if we wanted to flip over there. And of all the positions that are in there, we've highlighted the ones that still remain as part of that Keys budget. If we want to look at that now, or
Why don't we just kind of run through what the items are that are some potential cuts? Just kind of give us a thumbnail version as we're going down.
So one of the things that Dr. Woodard was working on was creating an adult high school. And so in order to run that adult high school, we needed a site coordinator. So that's one of the things that he was requesting to the Keys budget. Spring Hill High School is currently running a Shore Academy. They've dipped their toe into running a Northfield similar position. So they said that this position would add value and they'd be able to grow it. But if this position doesn't get funded, they can still kind of run it the way they're running it, but they can't really take it to that next level. District RTI coordinator, as we know, with the addition of the positions for RTI interventionists, and also where the state is going, and certain states are being sued over RTI. We basically took a look at, if we had somebody that coordinate this on a district level to make sure that there was fidelity across the board with how RTI was being implemented, that could be a definite benefit to the district. One of the things that work-based learning coaches was from the special ed department. What these work-based learning coaches do is they impact key number 7 because they're able to intervene and work with students of exceptional abilities on the job site. So more work-based learning coaches means more exceptional ed kids out in the workforce getting job training to help them train them to be better, more independent individuals. And in essence, that gets more kids into key number 7. Highland Park was looking for a PBL teacher. They were wanting to do as part of rotations, project-based learning experience every single day, as well as Mount Pleasant Elementary School, Wright, and Baker. Those were all positions that were taking the middle school and the high school STEM and STEAM and engineering and pushing it a little bit further down in the elementary school level. Mount Pleasant Middle School had asked for an additional math instructor to impact key number 4, which, as you guys know, is making sure that more kids are successfully completing Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade. Riverside had asked for some educational assistance with RTI groups. Since they will be reducing their Title I status, they're going to be losing an educational assistant, so they had asked to keep that in there so that person can keep working with students that are below grade level. Mount Pleasant High School was looking for a work-based learning / in-school suspension person at a cost of $12,500. And then Stan had also said, if we need to, we can reduce one of those building operator positions in the new structure that we do to go ahead and fit us up under that $2.2 million umbrella. So much going back to what Eric was saying, we don't like to take them out, but this is the fun of budget season as we turn the dial. Which way do we want to go?
All right, so
What's left?
well, I guess first, just to give some feedback, I would much prefer, that we had got all this information early on so that we're not like here at the last minute trying to figure out how to deal with these things. But I know it's a learning process, and so it is what it is. We got to figure this out. So we've got this around 2.2 if we leave the 2% raise in. How would we fund that? And so we've gone over some possibilities looking at revenue and looking at maybe making some expenditures. So I'm going to open the floor and let you all jump in and help me figure this out and help us all figure this out. So Ms. Morency has all the answers.
Oh, yeah,
so
right.
let's
No, I have a question.
I'm going to go ahead and start making notes.
Regarding the revenue, is that 900,000, is that within the percentages that the county commission sees us getting?
The
Yeah.
900,000 was what, based upon where the budget was on 5.9, that was an additional ask of the county commission to fund that budget. It wasn't related to where the county commission thinks we're going to be on the different items that we've already talked through.
Yeah,
So-
but that's sales tax and property tax, right?
Right,
That
right.
900,000, are we within the percentage that they think that it will go up?
we're well within that, but we're not basing, right now, the budget that you're looking at to come to the 2.2 has no increases whatsoever over this year. That assumes no increase whatsoever.
Okay, so if we asked for the extra 700 and 200,000, we would be within the percentage that they see
Yes,
it
ma'am.
going up? All right,
Yes.
that's.
We would have an argument to make that case.
Well, and just to clarify, I guess we're already asking them to budget more than what they budgeted last year. It's just that what we were asking them, or potentially asking them to budget, would be very conservative of that kind of flat line economy. You know, like we knew we had actual revenue came in this year more than last year. We would just assume flat line economy and we'll just budget that for next year. That's an increase above what they budgeted last year. But we're getting in now into the territory of saying, and we feel like there's a pretty good basis to believe that the economy is going to grow some next year. So that's the biggest difference, I guess. And I think it's very conservative. I think it's well within reason. It's probably under.
That was my question.
Mr. Moore and then Mr. Pennings, I guess.
Okay, yeah, and I've been saying this for years, so I know, Stan, you had to really squeeze on some of these, but I appreciate the accurate budgeting that we're looking at. I like getting to the point where we're looking at actual salary figures, not just, we're kind of paying these amounts,
Yeah.
and let's just go up percentages. I just still have, on that line, though, I start to have trouble when we start moving things like tubes and tires back over to fund balance. Because in my mind, that's something that is going to be done every year, and we really should be doing that as a budgetary item for maintenance. And I would go the same way. I mean, the PLC, professional development, am I reading that? Did I go back to that
Yeah.
right? Again, that seems to me like something we really shouldn't be moving to fund balance. And I'm doing that strictly on I'm trying to look towards the future here of being very accurate with our budgeting, and that seems like things that, I understand we're trying to move things around, but it seems like to me like things we should be actually budgeting for on an annual basis to take care of.
We did tubes and tires last year at a fund balance, and we didn't have any problems, so we're okay. We're good.
My problem is that it's not accurate budgeting.
Good point.
That's my
True.
problem, and that's just
Yeah.
personally. Other board members may have a problem with that. To me, I'm happy to see us moving in that direction of actually being very accurate, and so that we have a projection where let me go back 3 years when I came on the board.
Sure.
I'll go back to the textbooks. There was a line item for $200,000 for textbooks. And when we started talking about that, we realized at no point had they ever spent $200,000. They would spend zero, and then 3 years from then, they'd spend $400,000. That's not an accurate budgeting concept. And that's the reason I'm happy to see us start moving to an accurate year by year. This is what we're going to spend.
Yeah.
And to go with this, and we talked about this at the last meeting as well, I think this is really important as we start talking about budgeting for maintenance of our facilities on an annual basis. And I think that's why we need to be very careful about moving things to fund balance when these are legitimate concerns that are going to come up year after year. They really should be budgeted for on an annual basis, in my mind.
And I think it is a good point that what do you do when that one day you wake up and there is no fund balance and you never budgeted that in the past and then you can't buy tires and tubes, then you got real issues, Mr. Pennings.
Well, and what David is saying, you have that with textbooks, at least you used to have. And he's right, we didn't spend on textbooks, and I'd fight and fight, everybody else would fight and fight. Well, you'd take $500,000 or $300,000 out of fund balance afterwards, and then the kids wouldn't get their books that they needed at the start of the school year, and they wouldn't get them until the Christmas break. And if you never budgeted for them, it wasn't ever figured in the BEP, and you were lost. So I'm like David, I like to see things that we know are going to be reoccurring costs budgeted for every year. And as far as being over, and it's like you say, Mr. Bates, if we ask just for the increase that we know we're supposed to get, and we had this discussion last year, and the county commission finally bent to our wishes, they're going to have to increase the maintenance effort simply because of the increase that we're supposed to be getting. And that's where the problem always is with the county commission. Now, I agree with you saying we can't go overboard, but that increase is rightfully ours to spend this year. And we should make sure that we fight to get what we need. But and like I say, I'm like David, I don't like to budget for things out of fund balance that should be budgeted for in the regular budget every year.
Ms. Kinzer?
Just for clarification, this that you've shown, these are cuts. These are not coming out of fund balance or GP. These are things that you would cut. Is that what that is?
These are all things that,
Potential.
right, these are all things that are in the GP budget now that we would cut to get
From the
down.
GP?
Yes.
Okay. So what's going to be taken out of fund balance? Have we seen, what,
Just those two I mentioned. It's essentially 62, I'm sorry, 72,000.
Okay.
Well, that's what's going to move to fund balance, to
All right.
fund through fund balance.
In addition to the things that are already in the pink.
Right. This is not funding anything with fund balance dollars, if that's what you're asking. We're not moving anything from fund balance to cover.
but unless we say cut them, they'll still be in the budget, right? We'd
Yes,
have
ma'am.
to say, okay, we don't need this.
We
or
have to either
whatever.
cut these, or like we said, look at increasing revenue, or a combination of all of those things.
So Eric, with this, I think this would be a good time to go, let's pull up the Keys budget sheet that we were looking at. So you guys have seen what we've proposed to take out, but there are still things that are in there. So we kind of showed it to you in one way, because if you take the original doc and then piece it against that one there, you would have to like map it. So this right here, Eric basically formatted to look differently based on those two documents that you would have to piece together. So Eric, take it away.
There are a few items that if we take away some of the positions in the keys, also eliminates some of the supplies and those kind of line items. And that was, I can't remember how much that was, but about $70,000. We would reduce what's in the pink column based upon the positions going away as well. And then if you look down on the green column, every position that's highlighted in yellow still remains in the GP budget. It is still in there. It is not on that list of budget revisions to get us to the 2.2 million. So
take that all the way down key by key and see what's left in there.
well, it's not formulated. I just highlighted to show the position.
Show them the highlighted ones.
Okay, so that's one of the related arts positions. There's another one. I think all three of those are the ones that you had us add. There's the fourth one. The two instructional coaches, 180,000 is still in there. The two technology specialists are still in there. The 120 day.
Let me jump in. So what do you mean, still in what?
They're still in the GP budget. In other words, we're not proposing that those get cut out to meet the $2.2 million that those would stay in there.
What would stay in there? The ones that are
Highlighted in yellow, yes. Those did not make it on the list that we just went through for potential cuts.
Okay. But everything, what we're looking at, this $2.2 million hole to fill, that would put all those things in the green column in.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's
All right.
correct.
All right.
That was our starting point after last week was this $1.4 million. We went back and put all of those in the GP budget so that they were there. And then that was our starting point to get back down the 2.2 million. So we added every one of those positions.
Okay. All right, so I think one of the first things I think we need to have some discussion about is figuring out what a problem is, and then we can figure out how to solve it. So right now, if we leave everything in the green GP, is that a rap song or no? So anyway, so everything in the green is in there. There's a 2% raise in there. If we just leave all that in there, that's a $2.2 million problem to try to solve.
Well, if you take out what we've removed from the GP budget, not related to keys, is that what you're saying? If we just leave the keys positions in there?
All right, so if we put all the keys in the green column, we put the raise, we've got a $2.2 million shortfall.
Correct.
That we've got, that's the $2.2 million
That's our starting
problem.
point, yes.
Now, we can expand that. Now, we've already talked about how we would fix the $2.2 million problem by looking at some revenue and looking at some of these expenditures. We can expand. We can make that a bigger problem to try to work through. One of the things we could be looking at is, do we just do a 2% raise? Do we do an additional raise? If we do, then our hole got bigger, and we've got to find more. It's not going to be a $2.2 million hole to fill. It's going to be a larger hole. And we can then go back and look at revenue, or we can look at reductions of expenditures. But I think that's what to me, it seems like that's the first discussion that we need to have. Now, I will tell you that I was hoping that if we had some flexibility, that maybe we could go back and look at that. Under this particular scenario, when we're looking at the $2.2 million, it looks like that's going to consume a lot of our flexibility on revenue, and it's going to consume a lot of things. So I don't know if we have any additional flexibility, but I'm willing to listen and hear input from all the committee members and board members. So, Mr. Moore and then Ms. Kinzer.
Mr. Parliament, can I go back again a couple of weeks to where I'd asked to move everything non-position related from the blue to the purple, whatever color that is? What did we talk about was that dollar figure roughly?
You're going to test my memory now.
280 something?
280 something? That sounds about right.
And I brought that up. We'll just use that as a round number. We can go back a couple of weeks and look at that. Y'all remember the discussion on that, is where I'd asked some of the things that were, they were I don't know, a bunch of small things, but they add up.
And it's everything highlighted in red there is.
Okay.
So.
That's this. Okay,
Yeah.
so I just want to mention, if we're looking at moving things around, now we're talking about moving some of the positions out that it seems like they would actually be ranked higher than some of the things that I had asked to move over. Would that be a correct assumption?
Well, what we did, one of the things, with moving, like, for example, Baker Project Lead the Way Out, we took those supplies out, too. So the number in the pink actually has dropped. If we stay on trajectory, if that changes, those go back in.
I guess I was just saying.
Is that what you're
those
talking
would
about?
still be things, if we move them back to the blue column, we could possibly have some savings there as well.
And I'm going to
Exactly,
jump
we
in
can.
and say that I think the things that you're looking at moving from the gray, they got moved over into the pink, so I don't know how much of an adjustment it would make on the
Yeah.
GP. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I think that's what
everything
you
got
were
moved to
wanting.
pink.
You were not wanting to move any positions. You were wanting to move like materials and that sort of thing, so.
I thought I found some money.
All right, well, hey, it's worth looking at, yeah. Yes, Ms. Kinzer.
You know, Williamson County, they're going to get a 3% raise, probably other surrounding counties. Are we not just a lot worried about our beginning salary and attracting those teachers we want to train and keep, like you were talking about? If we just give a 2% on 35, I mean, we're not even barely going to get to 36. And I'm not talking really Williamson County, Dixon, Lawrence County. If they give even a 2%, they'd be almost to 38. You know, you've got to attract teachers. And we talked about the fact when they're right out of college, and you think, well, they should want to come to Murray County. But I'm telling you, they are looking at how much they are going to be able to make, and the difference in 38,000 beginning and 35 or 36 is $200 a month. $200 a month is a payment or whatever. We have got to retain our teachers. We've got to not have a brain drain. We need to look at beginning, and maybe that's, you know, but a 2% is not going to add much to beginning.
Well, let's try to get some things out where we can kind of like something to chew on a little bit to try to figure out, is that a possibility or not? I'm certainly open. I think other committee members are probably open to exploring all options. If we went from a 2% to a 3%, how much more would we have to find? So we go from $2.2 million problem to what?
Another $600,000.
So we'd have to find another 600,000. And I'm just going to run through just one scenario just real quickly, what I was kind of thinking, and I don't know, maybe other committee members have some other things in mind. But what I was thinking is to fix the $2.2 million problem that we have, it looks like we could go back and adjust the revenues by about 900,000. And those reductions that you all had mentioned are roughly $1.445 million on the GP.
Correct.
And that totals to roughly 2.2. I mean, I'm rounding big time here. I don't know if it'll add up or not, but I mean, that's kind of roughly, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. That would get us there, potentially. We may have to, again, look at some numbers. But for me personally, I didn't want to go past that next line of doing these reductions to what we put in the Keys budget, what our schools came to us and said, these are things that we need to further our Keys, like, our district RTI coordinator. I think we're hearing fantastic things about RTI. That, to me, seems like that would be a good shot in the arm. Project Lead the Way, those instructors. I mean, that's something that our schools came to us and said, these are things that we want to try to further our Keys. So for me, I would be reluctant to go past that line. That would be kind of a red line for me anyway. So to figure out where we would come up with the 600,000, we'd have to look, for me, I think it would be looking at the revenue. And we are, and again, we can talk our way through it, and we may be comfortable with that. But I think then we're getting into that territory with the commission of, to be able to adequately fund that, they are potentially looking at having to affect their rate. Now, maybe an argument can be made. Maybe more sales tax will come in than maybe what we're estimating. Maybe it would be enough to cover the 600,000. But I think that you potentially, in order to get that 600,000, it's going to have to probably come out of another penny, or they would have to increase by a penny, or, well, how many pennies would that be? 100. They're saying a penny's worth 177,000 right now. So how many? 4 more pennies. So they'd have to take that away from somebody, another department, to give it to us, or they would have to say, taxpayers, we're going to increase your rate by 4 pennies, and that's not even getting into capital yet. That's going to be a big kicker for them. So anyway, but I think this is good, healthy discussion for us for maybe try to talk our way through it. Mr. Penningson.
Well, we hired Chris to advance our school system. And myself, I don't want to take anything out of Keys. I understand the budget time, but I don't want to take anything out of Keys. As far as the 3% raise for the teachers, I don't think we should go, for the employees, we should go below 3%. But when you speak about teachers now, do you want to buy a house in Williamson County? And I think the median price on a house in Williamson County is something like $340,000 right now. Or do you want to buy a house in Columbia for $200,000 and drive 25 miles down 31 twice a day? So I think we have to figure in those things too. I mean, yeah, you can't figure them in the budget, but yeah, I think you have to think that way when you're talking about it. But I wouldn't want to go below a 3% raise. I just think if you give anything below a 3% raise, to me, is like a slap in the face. But that's just me.
What I would suggest that we take tubes and tires and the PLC PD and move that back into the GP. And then the site coordinator for the adult high school, that was the one that was the easiest to give up.
No, well, nothing's really easy to give up.
Well, I understand that, but
Nothing's
that was
easy.
at the top
But
of
if
your
that,
list.
but if that's an area that we want to get into, maybe we take another year and study it, and we try to do it the year after. So nothing's really easy to give up, but
It was on the top of your list.
yeah,
Somebody's list.
yeah, somebody's list, yeah. None of this is easy.
So that would pretty much balance that out.
And so what were you were saying we would move the tires and tubes, and then what was the other thing?
The PLC PD.
PLC.
Move those back into the GP, so that's 72,000, and then you have 77, 73, you have 77 for your second.
I'm only seeing 70,000. Am I missing that?
72,818 for tubes and tires, and 20,000.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, got you.
I'm sorry.
My bad. So that's what your thoughts would be as far as
And 600,000. I agree. I hate to see any of these positions because I think that those are positions, all positions that we wanted. But, and then look for the 600,000 somewhere else.
Well, so let's get some more discussion. I mean, is there, I want to hear from other committee members. Do we want to, in addition to trying to find the 2.2, we expand that to find another 600 to try to do a 3% raise? So let me get some, I may have to just start going down the line, getting everybody talking. Mr. Moore?
So, I'm lost now. Minus the first item there, the site coordinator for the adult high school. Mr. Bates, did I understand that you were saying you would prefer to keep all of those other keys items in? So that would be, we've still got to find the revenue for that, correct? Or we got to meet that?
No, the 2.2, if we fund the 2.2, that's all the items on the green GP. I mean, the green keys column, right?
Well, yeah, all those items are in there.
So what we would be doing is reducing the 2.2 by taking things out, taking the keys out. So we would go down from a 2.2, trying to fit that, we would shrink that down by taking some keys things out.
Well,
so what my point was is I would leave it a $2.2 million, leaving all those key items in, and we would fund it by looking at the revenue and then these reductions on the GP.
So if you leave it as is now, you're taking $1.4 million out of GP, which is what is on top.
The top half.
And approximately 700,000 in additional revenue, correct? So that would be 900. So that would be 2.3 plus another 600,000 to go from 2% to 3%. Right. So that would be about a $2.9 million problem to try to find. I mean, that's how you would get there.
All right. So anyway, so I think that if we leave it at 2.2, we could probably fix it by going back and looking at those revenue and taking out these things out of GP. I think we can fix that. If we add another 600,000, then we either got to go back to the revenue, find some additional revenue, or we start taking some of those things out below that line of the keys. And for me, I'm not comfortable taking anything out of there other than, I think Ms. Morency's got I think this is a good adjustment, what you mentioned. But other than that, I would be, if we were going to try to find another 600,000 to do a 3% raise, I would be probably leaning more towards revenue myself. Mr. Pennings.
I'm not in favor of taking out anything. I've been in favor, and I think this is what the 9th budget I've done, is asking for what you need and fight for what you need. Give them good reasons for what you need and fight for it. Because I'm sorry, but if you're going to improve education, if you're going to improve anything, it costs money to improve. And my way of thinking, pure and simple, if this is what you need, ask for it, fight for it, see what happens.
What would we need as far as increases in property tax? Not to charge people, but percentage-wise, and property tax and sales tax in order to get to that 600,000?
That would be an additional 600,000 on top of this, so.
Right.
I mean, it depends on where you want to try to get it
Yeah.
from. I mean, do we ask for it in sales tax? Do we ask for it in property tax? I mean, it depends on how you go about that.
Well, what percentage are we going up in property tax?
If we ask for what
The
Mr.
900
Bates
yeah,
asked
the
for, that would be about
700,000.
700,000 there and 200 on the, or 200 on the property tax and 700 on the sales tax.
Sales tax. And what
Yes.
percentage is that up on the property tax for that 200?
That was almost 3%,
3%? And on the sales tax was
5%.
Okay.
We just have to clarify that we were already, okay, I just wanted, when we're talking about percentages. Ms. Parker?
No, I follow budget. I do not feel like I have a very, very, very deep understanding, so, talking about kind of makes me a little nervous. But can we go back to the GP stuff? Where we found the 1,445,000. Okay, down a little bit, please. Yes, I'm sorry, the GP funded keys. Okay, there's some things in that. Unfortunately, I'm getting the picture we can't have it all. We're gonna have to make choices, and these are hard choices. Okay, well, my position's probably not popular, so disclaimer, but, our teachers have done a good job for a long time, and they have come through. They've been told to do this, they do it. They've been told to do that, they do it. I think they deserve a raise. Some of these things are falling under categories that I don't feel like have great oversight or continuity. So, until we're doing things really, really well, I'm not super eager to add some of these positions. So I'm a little bit in favor of pulling some of these things out and giving the teachers a raise. I think that's solid. I think it's evidence-based that they've done a good job. And so, but I still feel like we have a lot. I got an earful today over inconsistencies at the central level, and, I would agree with them. It was still very mistrust and a lot of inconsistencies. So I think when we're adding into things that aren't managed well, personally, I'm in favor of taking it slow. And once we're doing a really good job, then growing. So I know my position is not popular, and I apologize for that. I want to see us all pull in the same direction and these be a good thing, but I think we keep growing in some of areas that we aren't doing a great job, and I think the teachers have done a really good job sticking with it.
So, Ms. Powers, are you looking at, we would, I guess, find some additional funds on taking some of the things out on the keys, or which particular
No, I
category?
think people were saying, we don't want to take, some of these additional positions and this work-based learning and stuff. I'm in favor of the concept, but until I see consistent oversight, management, and continuity, and people being held accountable for what they say, doing, I personally don't think we need to be, pushing the throttle as hard as we are. I mean, we're all talking about a dial. I love the concept, but until I see it done well, and, until we do what we say more, I think we're pushing the accelerator, and it's not cultivating an atmosphere of trust, and I don't feel like we're getting where we're trying to go.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Powers. Ms. Parker?
And since I came in late, I'm trying to catch myself up. As far as the GP number, are we going with, as far as revenue, like 99.5 million?
All right, so to update you on things, going through that GP, that 99, when we were at our meeting on May the 9th, we thought that figure included all of the green GP items.
Okay.
Or green keys column, but it didn't.
Okay.
So they have since adjusted that. So in order to, when we look at the GP to do that 99, that would give a 2% raise. That would be to fund all of the keys items in the green column. That would be to do the step raises. That would be to cover everything. But if we do that, we currently have a $2.2 million deficit. And so what we went through is, okay, if we're going to try to fund that $2.2 million deficit, how do we fund that? And one of the things we looked at was on the revenue side, The county has given us some updated information, what they project a penny to be worth, or our funds to be worth. So there's some money there that's about 200,000. And then sales tax, previously we were being very conservative on the sales tax projections of just using this year to estimate for next year, and so that'd be kind of a flat line economy. But if we wanted to go back and try to say, which I think the economy is going to grow, if we said, okay, historically it's grown by a certain pace, we believe sales tax next year is going to, the economy is going to grow by 5%, that's about another 700,000. So looks like we could go back if we wanted to. We could look at the revenue side of things. There's maybe about $900,000 to make up that deficit. And then we looked at what the superintendent's office has brought as far as some expenditure savings to try to make up that deficit. And they went through the GP section, the total amount, if we did those reductions, the total amount would be about 1.445 million. So if we took those cuts out and we made the increases in our revenue by about 900,000, we can cover that, or roughly cover that $2.2 million deficit. What we've been here having a discussion about is that the only problem that we have? Is it a 2.2 million problems? I think we could probably figure that out. If we want to do an additional raise, go from a 2% raise to a 3% raise for our employees, that's going to cost us around another 600,000. And so that's kind of where we're in discussion now. Do we want to take that on? If that's and that's kind of the first discussion we've been having is, do we want to try to find the 600,000? And then if so, then have some discussion on how to figure that out. So that's kind of where we're at so far, just to give you an update.
I will say I'm in favor of the 3%, and I'm in favor of us tightening our belt, preferably at the central office level as much as we possibly can. And because I do think that at the school level, I think things seem to be running well, but I think there's still some questions about how things are managed at central office. And so does this include the raises for central office as well?
No, it hasn't. If we did, I was thinking that if we did the $900,000 adjustment on the revenue, and then we took out these roughly $1.5 million cuts, I think that was going to be a little bit more cuts than what is needed. And so we potentially could fund that. I think there may be enough play. I don't know. We'd have to run the final numbers, but I think we needed, what, another 150,000 or so? How much? 130,000 if we included those, but we have not included those.
I will say before I came here, I happened to see a commissioner who told me that if we were starting out at $9.5 million, that was going to be a really hard sell for the commission, and that there's probably a better than average chance that we're going to lose a penny this year. So that being said, I think we're going to have to tighten our belts even further. But I still am in favor of a 3% raise for the teachers.
Okay. Mr. Beaver.
Thank you, sir. As Ms. Power said, throwing something out on the table that's not very popular is the Catapult program. You know, I think it's a good program, but it's very expensive for a very few amount of kids. And, you know, we have $290K for Catapult, plus the teacher's salary that's in that program with the contractor.
Those are, the entire cost of Catapult is for the curriculum, the software programs, and the 2 funded positions that come from the Catapult company.
Mm.
So that is the cost, yes.
Yeah.
But it's actually low. We actually have to fund 1 additional position, and that's I think an English teacher at Cox that comes in part of the day and does some direct instruction with kids.
Well, but my question is, with her experience, could she take and manage that program by we hire within, bring 2 people in, and basically cut Catapult out, and we manage that program within the system.
The 2 people that Catapult's in here are not traditional teachers.
Right.
They're people that have been trained in the psychological process of de-escalation and also reorientation of students. So I would recommend that those people would go through that exact same training. That would take time and that would take money to get to that point. We could possibly save a couple thousand here and there if we did that, but I don't know if the program may not be up and running by the beginning of school, which means Cox would go back to the similar situation they were before Catapult came in, where all of those undercredited and overage students would be back in normal instruction every single day with no supports and no assistance.
But how many kids did we have in Cox Catapult program this entire year?
Do we know the entire year?
Up until the last point, we had approximately,
I could,
28, but I'll have to get a better.
yeah, we could find that number, but it's not just the kids in the program, it's also the kids in the rest of the school as well. Because as the students that are in Catapult are overage, undercredited, and behaviorally challenged. And a lot of those students have disrupted instruction in the past to the point that teachers couldn't teach. So as those students are in Cougar Academy, their behavior is changing and they're learning. For example, we had a student at Spring Hill High School that was a 16-year-old eighth grader that was basically on a track for prison. After 6 months in Catapult at the midterm this past December, he was promoted to Spring Hill High School and is progressing beautifully. He's doing a great job. That's a student that was basically bound for dropout in prison. So a lot of these students that we're rewriting their DNA for life to get them back on the credit track, to get them back on the graduation track, and to get them back to productive citizens. And that means that the rest of the school is now able to focus on academics because those behavioral challenged students and undercredited students are no longer disrupting normal instruction. So you can't look at it as just the kids that are being affected inside Cougar Academy. You've got to look at the entire rest of the school as well, what they're able to accomplish as a result of those dual programs taking place.
No, I mean, I'm just throwing things out. We're
Yeah.
looking for money, and I see a lot of good coming from
Yeah.
the Catapult program. But, if we could figure out a way to bring it within, we could cut a couple $100,000, I'd say.
Give or take.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, this is
I don't know
just-
what the training costs. We'd have to research the training, and then we'd have to find the personnel that want to do it. We could probably save a little bit.
Well, I know in talking to the two gentlemen out there, I think one of them's a kickboxer and the other's
Yes.
some other kind of sports.
Yes. Physical sports.
True.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so are we getting closer to any consensus? Anybody got any good plans, good ideas? I mean, we're treating this as a work session, as kind of a brainstorming type session. Mr. Moore.
Just since I'm getting lost flipping between sheets here. I saw in the email you had asked, we're asking for, at this point, almost $7 million more than we asked for last year? Or we're budgeting for almost, $6.8 million, is that right?
With the $2.2 million problem, that's a little over $8 million more
$8
than
million.
last year.
That's not all local. A lot of that is because we're getting additional state revenue.
Which is
as
about
well.
5.5, 6 million of that? Or is that the 6.8?
I think currently what we're looking at,
Well, I guess to get to, that won't matter for what my point is, I guess. I really like that we got in here and started looking at some of these line items. And I guess, I don't know if Mr. Bates was getting that direction. I really wish we'd done that sooner than now. Because I think we could solve this problem if we dug a little deeper and, as others have said, tightened our belt without having to go back and look at the revenue numbers. I think we could solve this problem if we actually went to each of these line items and each accounting code and really looked at what we're spending, what we've traditionally spent, and really put the numbers to it without having to go back and kind of play with revenue numbers or get creative with moving things to fund balance, which I don't like. But that's where I'm at right now. I know others have mentioned wanting the 3% raise. I guess I haven't even found where we've gotten to the 2%. I don't know if I'm ready to even talk about an extra percent on top of that if we haven't even gotten to that point yet. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm any closer to anything than I was when I walked in tonight.
Well, I mean, we've got to figure out something. And so at some point, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back, and we're probably going to go into committee if we're ready to start doing some work to try to figure this out. But I'm happy to continue the discussion. You know, again, this is work session. This is laid back. This is informal. I'm open to entertaining ideas and trying to figure this out. And then we can start trying to get some work done. Mr. Moore.
Other than the new keys requests, I guess my thing would be, what are any other new programs we were looking to add that we just may have to put off a year? Or any other new things that we were wanting to add that this year that they may need to get added next year? I mean, that would be, if I'm starting to cut something in my own budget, that's where I'm going to start.
Well, I think one thing we got to figure out is how much do we need to start trying to cut, and how much do we need to try to fund? I think that's kind of, to me, one of the first things we got to really figure out. I mean, because I think if we leave it at a $2.2 million problem, I think we can figure that out. I think we can probably figure it out by looking at some of our revenue. We can look at some of our expenditures. But I do think that if we get into adding another $600,000, we're going to have to do some cutting somewhere or potentially asking for some additional funds. So I guess I'd like to get maybe some input of the committee members and the board members as far as the 2% versus the 3% raise. Because if we go from the 2% to the 3%, we got to find another $600,000. So what's everybody's maybe just kind of a show of hands of the ones that are for going to the 3%, maybe a show of hands of the ones that want to leave it at 2%, and maybe a show of hands of who's still on the fence a little bit. Maybe we can kind of get some guidance on that. So, all right, so the ones that are want to increase, go from 2% to 3%, if you raise your hand. All right, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 members. And those that are want to leave it as is at the 2%. All right, so we got 1 member. And what about those that are on the fence? So we got 3 members on that. Okay.
Can I
I have a crazy suggestion.
Okay.
Why don't we just take every line item and reduce it by $1,000? See how much you save. Every line item. Reduce it by $1,000, and see how much you save. $1,000 going to break any line item?
Wouldn't the percent make much more sense?
I don't care how you do it. Reduce every line item by a percent or by $1,000, whatever.
I think the danger in that is in some of the salary line items, because we've gotten to a point where we budgeted by person, 1,000.
Do everything but salary. See how much you're gonna save. I don't think $1,000 will break just about any line item.
All right, so some things to think about, to talk about. Ms. Morency and then Ms. Kinzer.
So as I understand it, if we cut all of these that you gave us, that cuts it to 2.2. And then we would, and that's where we need to be, is 2.2 with just the 2% raise.
Correct.
So in order to do the 3% raise, then we would need another 600,000.
That's correct.
Is what instead of asking for 900,000, we'd be asking for the 600,000. So we would cut our ask by 300,000 for revenue, for the revenue.
If you funded that additional 600,000 to get you from 2 to 3 with the revenue piece, yes.
Okay.
Instead of asking for the 9, you could ask for the 6.
I just want to remind everybody that the reason we've got a fund balance in the first place, mostly, is because we didn't spend in all three sections of regular ed, vocational, and special ed. All of that was not spent, budgeted, but was not spent. That's teachers, that is classrooms that weren't hired for those positions. They're the bulk of what's going to be in fund balance. So I just want to remind you all that, that's all.
I think we need to clarify a little bit on what goes into fund balance. Really, one of the things that probably historically causes us to have fund balance is on that revenue line, if we can go back and look at that. All right, so last year we budgeted 38 million. The actual revenue that came in, well, we don't, maybe the historical chart, maybe it showed this, I don't know if it shows that or not, but the county commission historically does not want to allow us to budget what is actually going to come in. So we have actual revenue and then we have budgeted revenue. When they artificially set that budget lower than what the actual revenue is, as that money comes in, that's the bulk of what's going into fund balance. So some of this is what we're talking about tonight, is maybe to try to correct some of that by letting, because if we go to the county commission, we say, hey, look, we think the actual revenue next year and sales tax is going to be this number. That's what you ought to let us budget that. Then that doesn't go into fund balance as long as we spend it. Now, you're right, if we don't spend in those categories, that's additional way that things would go into fund balance. And it looks like one of the big things that they're cutting, maybe that's what historically has been happening. You all are proposing an adjustment of $800,000 to the salary line items. Is it not salary where it's maybe was being budgeted a certain amount, but not all those positions were being filled, and so
Correct.
some of that money was going back into fund balance. So that's part of one of the cuts that we're looking at tonight, is to maybe get down to, I don't know if bare bones is the word, but to get more closer to accurate what that is. So some of this may be a good process on both sides, that we're getting more firm on the expenditure side, but what goes hand in hand with that is we have to get our funding body to be more realistic and real with what they're allowing us to budget on the revenue. I mean, it can't work both ways. We can't then will it things down to the bone on the expenditure side, but they want to artificially set a lower number on the revenue side, and then all that money just goes into fund balance. We won't really get anywhere with that situation. And that may have been, like, historically, that may explain some of why that happened over the years. It may have been there's a little bit of a mistrust between the two bodies, and maybe the prior boards may have thought that they're not going to let us spend all the money that's going to be coming in on revenue, and there may have been some of that back and forth of not being realistic as to what the true budgets are. So I think maybe we've started engaging in this. I think it's healthy for us to get more accurate as far as what our budgets are and what the needs are, but it goes both ways. Let's see, Ms. Parker.
Going back to discussion about fund balance, because when I pull up the sheet, and I guess we're asking to take like 3.4 out of fund balance to fund the pink column, is that correct? I'll be honest, I have heartburn at this point about what our fund balance is, and I don't know that I can go that high on funding fund balance, just because of the uncertainty in my mind of where we are on fund balance. I mean, it looks like it's going to be healthy, but hearing that we have $1 million that's restricted and we really don't have any idea what we can do with it, I'm worried that something like that's going to happen in the future, and we're going to have another $2 million that all of a sudden gets restricted that we can't do something with. So last year, I think I felt a lot more comfortable going forward with our fund balance, but I really don't have that same, I mean, the way that the process has gone this year, when we've gone from 20 million potentially in fund balance down to 9 million in fund balance, down to, things being untouchable in fund balance, I'll just throw that out there, that the pink column is really kind of giving me heartburn at this point. And there's some of those things that I think we're going to need to move over and really be intentional about where we're trying to go as a system. I think we need to know generally where we want everybody to be going and all be pulling in the same direction. And I still see a lot of things that just seem kind of scattered here, there, everywhere, and I just don't see a rhyme or reason to them. So I'm hoping we'll go through that.
And one of the things with the fund balance, we're kind of darned if we do, darned if we don't on that. One of the things that I think we've probably been beat over the head with in years past is that there is funding available in fund balance and we haven't utilized that. And that causes some consternation by our funding body, because they're like, well, why are you all asking us to fund things when you all have this fund balance? So I think that it's probably part of our due diligence to look at, if we do have some funding, to be able to utilize that funding to show our funding body, hey, we are stepping up to the plate. We are spending some of our own funds on things. As far as the reluctance goes, I think, yes, I guess I've got some natural caution myself. If we were, I think the current estimates that we're looking at looks like maybe around 9.5, and I guess that's based upon the close of April, when some of that's going to fluctuate a little bit. If we were looking at, and that's with the 3% on top of that, still staying in the rainy day fund. Mm-hmm. If we were looking at taking it to, right on the brink of like $7-8 million or something, getting close, then I think that would probably cause me to start having some heartburn as well. And then two, but I don't think we're there. And then two as well, on the expenditures, Mr. Parliament, I think, is very cautious, and probably on some of those things before you start pulling the triggers. If we did say, okay, we want to be able to use this fund balance starting July 1st, when we get to June 30th, we will know basically to a penny as to what our available fund balance is at that point.
That's correct.
So I think we can still, if it looks like that, hey, maybe it wasn't as good as forecasted, we can always go back and say, maybe it was better than or not as good as what we thought. We can always look at that. So.
Well, I do think, though, that we're not just talking about the GP budget. When I said $99.5 million, but then I think when you throw in our capital expenditure budget of 80+ million, 85 million. I think that too is where traditionally we've gone to fund balance and done some capital expenditures out of there. So we've just got to find a healthy balance, I think, between the GP side and the capital side, because they're not going to fund $85 million. We know that. Unless somebody is hit the jackpot here tonight, it's not going to happen at the commission level. So it's really kind of a waste of our time to present that. I understand we have needs, and I understand we need to present what we need, but they don't have the capacity to do $85 million.
Well, and that, I think that's, from a practical standpoint, that's something that may be the case. But I think as far as our obligations as a board, I think what our obligations are is looking at, what are the needs? And if those are what the needs, if that's what, like these keys requests, if that's what the schools are saying, this is what we need to be able to further these things with in academics. If we as a board, if we determine, we've looked at growth projections and those are our needs. I think I can sleep at night that we've done our due diligence, we've looked and determined what our needs are. If they don't fund those things, that's on them. That's not on us. But we've done our job to figure out what the needs are, and we've presented it. And if they don't fund it, that's really then their responsibility at that point.
Yes and no. I can say that I want a Lamborghini, and I can go test drive a Lamborghini all day long. That doesn't mean I can afford a Lamborghini. So I think, if our budget is a Pinto, then it's not real realistic for me to go and test drive anything but a Pinto. I understand that we have the growth needs, we have the maintenance needs, And we've not done a great job of balancing that this year. That's been my biggest complaint about what we have done this past year. And eventually I will drop the whole bond issue. But I just think that we have to balance all this. And I just don't think that we can just close our eyes and say, well, we actually, that's the same mentality that we had when we first came on this board was, well, the commission won't do this for us, the commission won't do that for us. And you know what? The commission has stepped up in the last couple of years, and they have funded what we needed. Now they're going to come back on us and say, have you done what you said you were going to do with it? And that's where I'm worried about us going forward and being able to make a good argument. So I'm just saying I think we need to balance these things and be realistic. I would love a Lamborghini, but you know what? If I got to drive a Pinto, if it gets me from A to B, then that may be what I have to do. And there may be certain areas where we want a Pinto and certain areas where we want a Cadillac. And let's just figure those out and try to make the best decisions. But everything cannot be a Cadillac. Just can't.
Mr. Moore.
Okay. I don't know, I'm really liking the idea of just cutting a percentage on all non-personnel expenses. I know y'all don't like that, but
It's fine with me.
it seems like
Wherever you guys
that
want to
maybe-
go, it's not a problem.
It seems like where we may need to go. I just want to get back to a couple things, because all these are connected. We have to keep in mind that if we up the revenue projections, there's two sides to that. I mean, if we start asking for more on the front end, that means over the years, as we do that, fund balance is not going to grow as much. So we don't get that kind of pot of gold at the end of the year. Which leads me to my other thing on this, and this is the second year we've done this as the keys have progressed. And I was going to ask Dr. Marzak on that. What is the long-term, I mean, at some point, do we keep just, I'm not sure I project that we're going to have this nice, healthy fund balance money coming in to rely on for the keys budget forever. So, or do we have plans for shifting that a different direction, or are we just going to keep trying to do it that way? Because it seems like that's not a long-term sustainable plan. Short-term, maybe yes, long-term, no.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've got to look at down the road is what are the things in the keys that get the most traction that we've been able to fund out of fund balance, and do we want to move that over to the GP? For example, look at our RTI 120-day contracts. You're 87% more likely to move up between the tiers if you had an RTI interventionist versus if you didn't. That's one of the things I was going to comment on what Ms. Parker said. I gave you guys at mid-year progress on the keys with concerns to academic data, and that's what Dr. Prenderger's been doing for the last week and a half. It's the end of the year. And now she is quantifying every single thing funded under the keys. She's basically coming up with 3 sheets, elementary, middle school, and high school. She got a chance to show it to me today. Some phenomenal growth. Things that we've been able to do that you guys funded this year with concerns of the keys of college and career readiness.
And I think
But
that's
we do need to look to eventually, if we get a high return of investment, migrate that over to the green so it becomes a long-term embedded investment.
And that's part of what I guess I'm getting to, because I think the RTI is a good example. Years 1 and year 2, we're trying it.
Yeah.
Even though they are technically short-term contracts, I think by year 3, if we're still doing them and we've realized there are gains there,
Yeah.
they should be budgeted for out of recurring funds at that point. You
Yes.
know? I'm again, year 1, it seems okay to keep relying on fund balance for these things. Year 2, it seems a little less okay, but still okay. But as we keep moving forward, it just seems like it's at some point we have to budget these things, because whether they're one-time items or not, the reality is these are needs we have as a system that should start coming out of what we're budgeting for annually.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm approaching it. And I'll let you push your button now, Mr. Beatty.
Yeah, just real quick, since you've thrown out an idea, I'm looking for ideas to try to figure out how can we get through this. And so, Mr. Pennies, you may get most of the credit for this, but all right, so one of the scenarios we talked about before is to cover the $2.2 million shortfall, we could possibly look back at our revenue, and I think there's some flexibility there of about $900,000. We've got these expenditures that can be taken out of the GP budget of about $1.445 million. If we do a 3% raise, we would need another $600,000. Are you all suggesting that maybe we get the $600,000 by just telling the superintendent's office to do a % across all budgets, a reduction? Is that? what we're thinking?
Do you have some rough numbers?
I just took, assuming that 70% of our budget is salaries, so I took 30% of the $97 million in expenses. If you take 30% of that and then take 1% of that, that's $291,000. It's not going to get you anywhere close. And I mean, that's strictly driven by salaries and benefits being 70% of the budget, so.
All right, Mr. Pennings.
Excuse me, I agree with David, but as far as the fund balance, I think if you look back over the last 4 or 5 years, how much we spend on a fund balance on maintaining our buildings, it's going to be astronomical. I know it's going to be well over $6 million. I mean, and I remember years, the new board members weren't here, but Tommy remembers, Denny Beaver remembers a couple of years, where for 3 years or 4 years, we got zero from the county commissions to maintain our buildings. Yet they turn around now and they say, you let your buildings get such bad repair. The way the county set up, they're supposed to repair the buildings, not us. Or they gave us $30,000 or $40,000. You can't even buy one heating or cooling unit for $30,000 or $40,000. So yes, we have a big fund balance, and I'm in favor of when we finally find out what the final figure is, if we spend that down to the 3%, which I don't like to go, I'd like to keep it about 5%, and spend the rest to maintain the buildings and do repairs that we have to do, I'm all for that. But I mean, I just get my dander up when they say, well, the county commission won't approve the repairs. No, I agree. They haven't approved them for years until last year.
All right, so if we did just the reduction of non-salary line items, that would only get us about 291. Okay, so that's not enough to do a 3%. The other possibility is to look at asking our funding body for some additional pennies. And I think you said that, let's see, to get to 600,000, you'd be looking at, at 177,000 per penny, that's about 3.4 cents. Now, I don't know whether we would necessarily ask for all that by an increase of local property tax. We could actually, I think there's probably some more flexibility in that sales tax as well.
Great.
Okay. All right, so maybe this is a good time we have some discussions to mull over, and so let's take a break, and then we'll come back and see if we're about ready to do some business. Okay.
Let's just throw it in there this year. Let's just go for it.
All right, so, let me get some input from you all. Does everybody want to continue to kind of brainstorm and just talk informally in a work session, or do we feel like we're at a point now where we may be able to get some work done? Really, we've got to get this done by Thursday. And so Thursday, we're going to have a special call meeting for the board to be able to finalize whatever we're doing so we can get that to the county commission next week. So I would like for us to see if we could get some work done tonight rather than putting that off till Thursday, and then we can finalize things on Thursday. So, again, so let me get some input. Everybody want to continue to just discuss informally, or we feel like we're ready? Mr. Penix.
With a 3%, figuring a 3% raise and everything that we have in here right now, what are we going to be asking the county commission for the GP budget? Final figure, what are we asking them for?
It would be the 99.5 plus another 600,000, right, Mr. Parliament?
Yes. Yeah, you add another 600,000.
And there's going to be, that's a psychological threshold that we're crossing. I mean, numbers are what they are, if the need is what it is, but, what's that? I mean, another possibility, now we've been talking about, okay, instead of just dealing with the 2.2 million problem, which would include the 2% raise, we've talked about if we increase by another 600,000, where we could do a 3% raise, but another possibility somewhere in between. Instead of doing a 2% or a 3%, somewhere in the middle. Then we're really only adding another around, what, 300,000 if we did a 2.5% raise?
So cut 1% off of all the, like we talked about, cut the 1%, it's 291, and make it a 2.5% raise. Meets in the middle, roughly. There's a few dollars y'all can find. It's 291 and 300.
And we could probably get there in that scenario. I'm just throwing out ideas. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. Ms. Parker.
I also think we need to look at our salary schedule and make sure that we're being consistent on that. And I would like to see us in the next year take that all under advisement so that we have what we think positions need to be funded at. And that's why I'm a little bit hesitant this year as far as some of the increases that are put in there for central office positions. I'd rather just freeze everything at the current salary schedule and make sure that we're consistent with that at the positions that we have currently. And I think there might be some cost savings there as well. But in my opinion, that's board policy, and I don't want to deviate from board policy at this point, particularly with regards to salaries, principals, and central office.
And so what you're saying is we need to probably look at the entire, from a comprehensive standpoint, all salaries, probably all employees, teachers, central office, just across the board to make sure that we've got a good salary schedule. And I think that's certainly something that, makes a lot of sense to work on. Are you leaning towards, you would lean towards not doing any raises, or you're until then, or you're saying let's maybe do something now and then before we do anything else, we need to get all that done?
I'm saying, as far as raises, you mean like the 3%?
Right.
I'm okay doing the 3%, but I'm not in favor of doing any additional raises that were proposed for central office or any administrators, and going back and looking at what administrators are paid to make sure it's consistent with the salary schedule. And I think there will be some reductions there.
And I think one thing, I guess, I know that we've had the discussion about the central office, some of those adjustments that were brought to us. I do feel that there may be some adjustments that need to be taken, and again, maybe do that in a comprehensive way. That may be the best way of doing that, to make sure that everything's getting covered, if we are doing that. I do think that there is probably one critical item that that needs to be updated, and I think that's our CFO position. I think historically we've paid around 70, was it maybe around a little bit less than 70,000 for that position. Now, what's currently being proposed is 125. I don't know if I'm convinced to go quite to that extent, but I do think that that position needs to be adjusted, and probably needed to be adjusted yesterday, because we need to make sure that we've got a good person in that position, because otherwise I don't think, we as a board, we want to make sure that we've got good, reliable financial information, and it's just one of those key positions that if it's not working properly, there's a train wreck, and I think we've kind of gone through that, and I don't want any future boards to go through that again. So I think that's one thing that I think is critical to take a look at. But anyway, Mr. Pennings.
I have two questions. I agree with you, by the way, Mr. Bates, on CFO. Maybe we don't have to do that tonight. We can do that at a later time, but I agree with that. If we give the teachers 2.5, is that the only raise they get, or are they getting a raise from the state too?
That would be, that's it.
That includes it, okay.
Yeah, part of the budget we're looking at builds in just the step raise that happens year after year, and I think that's what, maybe close to $1 million. So that's built in already. So that the 2.5% would be in addition to that amount.
In addition to that, right. So they're actually going to be getting more than a 2.5% increase.
If they're still eligible for a step raise.
Right, they're still eligible.
But there's plenty that aren't.
Yeah.
And topped out a long time ago.
Over 200.
All right, thank you.
All right, so you all give me some feedback. We feel like we're gelling on something, Ms. Kinzer?
I'm trying to listen, but, we've got to be competitive. We've got to. We've got to attract the people. We've got to keep them. That's what the step raises are for. You don't just start somebody at $35,000 and for 20 years that's what they're going to make. They know every year as they go, they're going to get more money. That's just part of it. That's an important part of it. But if we don't at least give a 3%, we're not going to be competitive with the counties around. We're going to fall farther behind at beginning and at masters, at beginning or whatever. I also think the teachers have had a heck of a year. They've worked hard, but they've had a frustrating year. And I really think that we need to step up and support them and show them that we appreciate and realize the tremendous job they're doing. And a 2.5 sounds like that, it just doesn't sound like that we're that committed to letting them know how much we appreciated them.
Well, help me get there. So if we add another 600, what would your thought process of how we would get that extra 600? Would we go back to the revenue side, or would you take some things out of the keys?
The revenue side, absolutely. You know that this county is in a boom time. Sales tax is going to go up. They're building so many things in the crossing on the Murray County side. It's unbelievable. You know that sales tax is going to go up. You know that I went to graduation at Northfield, and I could not believe all the houses that are being brought on. Those are property tax. We won't get them. Later. At some point we will. I'm just saying the growth is unbelievable.
So you would maybe
I would
adjust the
revenue. Absolutely. And I think that you would have, I think that you could make it clear, and they would clearly understand, because they know what kind of situation this county is in right now. They know the influx of people. They know what's being built. They know what the tax revenue, that it's increasing every month. I think you can make a case for it easily.
Well, and I think we have to too, and I think this is part of our discussion with our commissioners and with our neighbors and with our community, that sometimes we got to look at these as not just dollars, but as investments. These are long-term investments. I think, investing in our teachers is a good thing. I think investing in some of these programs is a good thing. And as our county, look, a few years ago, our county was not maybe towards the top as far as in the state. But I think we're making good inroads. Are we there? No, we're not. But if we make some of these investments and we turn around our schools and we have some of the best schools in Middle Tennessee and in the state, that's going to attract good paying jobs. That's going to attract good tax revenue to be able to fund. So sometimes you got to spend a little money to make money in
then
the
you're
long term.
agreeing with me then.
Well,
We
I'm
need to
thinking out loud.
raise the revenue and at least give a 3%. Now, you know I'd rather see a 4%, but a 3% is at least as much as the governor said he was going to give them. 70% of the 4% that he gave us would be tantamount to 3%. And we've done our due diligence in that department. We made sure the money went to them. 70% of our budget is for our employees. So it seems to me that we ought to be looking at revenues and thinking 70% ought to go to them.
Well, I mean, I don't know, I don't know whether they'll do it or not, but I think there's certainly a valid argument to make. And if that's something that the committee and the board is willing to do, then I'm willing to present that argument as long as there's going to be support in our community and support to show our commission. Yes, they may be reluctant to fund those things, but if we're showing that our due diligence is that, hey, yes, we're making some investments, some long-term investments to try to get us there, then maybe that is maybe the course we ought to take. Ms. Parker.
One other question. What about the buses that we had talked about that we have included right now on capital? Was there any decision that was made if we're going to keep that?
No, we haven't got to that point yet.
GP.
So. Well, I think currently it's part of our capital budget, as it has been historically. So we could change and say, no, we want to include that on our GP. I think, me personally, I think that would be a very bad precedent that we would be setting. I mean, going back to your analogy about the Ferrari, we did have the Pinto, and it was sitting up on blocks. And we repeatedly asked for funding from the county commission, and the only thing they ever funded was potentially the buses. And all this whole thing about this $30 million list, that CMG list, this is a list that has accrued over time. We didn't make that list. That's something that has accrued over time, and that's been because we have not funded those things. We have not got funding for those things. And then we are now finally in a position where we can start getting ahead as a county and as a school system, where maybe we can start tackling some of these things on the EMG list, these maintenance items that really should have been tackled a long time ago, and to potentially put that in our GP budget, to potentially not, if we are going to have any flexibility in our fund balance, to take that out, something that has never even, ever, hardly anything's been given to us. For me personally, I just do not think that would be the right approach. But we could, and we may end up, if it gets sent back to us, we may end up having to look at some of those things. But I think we ought to present our budget as is, as far as our capital needs, and present our GP budget as is. And then the county commission can make some priorities. They can make some determinations. What is it a priority? If they don't want to fund the walk zone again, that's their priority. But we're doing our job to say that we don't think that's a good idea. We ought to do something about it. And we've done our job. Mr. Penix.
For too many years, as I sat on this board and got to this time every year, it was, we better not do this or we better not do that because the county commission is only going to fund this. The county commission will only fund this. And for years I've been saying, and I was the happiest man on the school board last year when the first reading, bang, it got passed. I almost reached up and kissed Chris, but I decided not to. But we need to ask the commission for what we need. And if we need 101, ask for 101. They keep wanting to do line item cuts. Fine, we know they can't do it, but you want to make a suggestion? You want to cut this? Okay, kids, you can't have this because the commission said you couldn't have it. Okay, we can't have a no walk zone because the commission won't buy the buses. Let's put the blame where the blame belongs, instead of the school board bending and saying, we can do without that, we can do without this. Let's get what we need and let them decide if they're going to fund it or not.
And of course, I think we've got a prime opportunity. We're healing some of that relationship issue that's happened over the years. I think there has been kind of maybe an animosity between the two bodies. And I think they did step up to the plate last year. To give them credit,
2 years, Central and this.
so there is a movement in the right direction. What my argument would be to them, let's don't stop progress. Let's don't go back to the way things were. Potentially like these buses. I don't know what particular, they've taken out pennies for the buses to potentially fund some other projects. Maybe those projects need to be done, but maybe they need to figure out a way of doing that. But I don't think that taking that away from the school system is the right approach. So my argument to them would be, we're making a lot of progress. Let's continue that progress. Let's don't go backwards. Yes, it is a big jump. It's something that I'm going to have heartburn over. I already have heartburn. Believe me. But I see that we're moving in the right direction, and I see the future. That's where I think we've got to keep the focus. These are investments, and I think if we make the right investments, it's going to pay dividends to our community. It's going to pay dividends to the county commission in the future. When we get those good paying jobs, and it's not just the very few taxpayers, because you all are like me. We're one of the very few probably people that are paying into property tax. We want more people in the game, more skin in the game of having good paying jobs where they're paying in the property tax to lessen the burden for all of us. But unless we do where we get our school system on the right footing and we get where those businesses want to bring those good paying jobs, we're not going to get there. But I think this is possibly a way of getting there. So, any other discussion, or do we feel like maybe we're ready to move into committee and maybe see if we can get some work done? See a nod ahead or two. Mr. Moore, was that a no, or are you just rocking?
Okay. I'll say where I said it a minute ago. I know we're short on time, but I still think there's some more money to be found in the budget. Cuts. I still think there is. I think, we're at the last week here and we found these. There has to be more. Out of a nearing $100 million budget, there has to be more cuts to come.
What about a combo of, all right, so if we add another 600,000, half of that, we go back to revenue, and then the other half, the 300,000, do what we talked about before.
1%.
Of them having to find 1% of non-salary, or how would that work?
I would go more particular than non-salary. I would say a 1% cut of anything that you don't know, and this is in talking with Stan some, anything that you don't have hard cost on. If you know what something's going to cost, I think we talked about some of the insurances, some of the other things. You know what those are going to cost. There's no variable.
What about like this? What about now they went through and they itemized about 1.4 million of cuts out of the GP. What if we just said, you all are going to have to find another 300,000? We just leave it up to them and their discretion to go find it wherever.
Hey, whichever way gets it there.
Yeah, they found 1.445818 in savings is what he said.
And so another look with the fine tooth comb. Ms. Powers.
Well, if we're brainstorming and there's never a wrong answer and we're just looking for creative ways to save money, how many teachers do we anticipate are retiring?
60. Already have.
I would love to see us explore with a percentage of that to give opportunities for job sharing, where people could job share and not pay salaries, even if it's in a traditional classroom. I think it's I'm aware of areas where it's been done successfully, but I think there's savings to, I mean, if we're brainstorming, there's savings to be had there. And I think we should try it for, you probably want to do all 60, but I'd love a percentage of those for a trial run and see how it works. But I think right now as we struggle for subs, I think there's rarely the need for a sub. And I think kids adapt, although there's, what?
I know it to be true.
So, you job shared.
I absolutely did.
But I think you could speak to Liz Mulder. That was in a special circumstance, but I know of some other teachers who taught in inner city schools, not in Murray County, but it was very successful. I think there is savings to be had.
So tell me a little bit more about that. I guess I'm not familiar with how that would work.
The circumstance that I'm aware of, it was at McDowell, the librarians job shared, so there was no benefits paid. So instead of 60, it was two part-time positions. The entire year, there was never a sub asked for. If one of them had a sick child, the other one stepped in. But one of the people who filled that position had done a first grade classroom in a job share position. One did 3 days a week, one did 2 days a week, and then the next week they flip-flopped.
So you would basically, you've got the amount that would be dedicated for a full-time position, but you would kind of break that
Salary,
up
but
into two
not
part-time
benefits.
people.
Correct.
Can I speak to it? Because I did it for 2 years.
Yeah,
I
love
retired
getting
in
ideas.
2008, and Cindy Johnson came up with the idea that Carrie Lancaster and I, art teachers, that we would job share. And it was the best 2 years I've spent in teaching. I worked 10 days a month. I didn't have retirement taken out. I retired. You didn't have to pay insurance. And at the end of the year, I got 100% check for being 100% because we didn't miss a day. If one of us couldn't be there, the other one worked.
So it gives a lot of flexibility
Absolutely.
to people. And then, two, we would get a potential savings on the benefit side. Okay.
Yeah, we don't call it job share, but under these new federal laws and that, I've got more part-time employees than I have full-time employees. And like they both said, if you just have to keep their hours per year.
But this may allow some of our retired teachers that want to still be in the schools where they don't jeopardize their
Yes.
retirement.
20 days.
Yeah.
And I think you're also capturing people who have children that they, young children that they
Right.
want to, continue teaching. But I think the quality, I think there's something for everyone in Murray County Schools, and I think we should give opportunities to that.
Yeah, if you have the right people, like you say, the two librarians, if they get along and they work good together, I mean, they'll make it work.
The situation like that, and it was when they, that was the whole, one of the many McDowell debacles under previous administration. There were people, when one of them got pregnant and was, not going to come back, there were people begging to come and fill that position. And, they put themselves together and proposed it. So, I think maybe to find two, people who, that might be a way to go about it.
Okay.
People approaching in pairs.
Yeah.
Not to belabor this, but for years, our northern county, bordering county, every time somebody retired, they would discuss with them, are you interested in job sharing? And because it's a great transition for a retired teacher to do.
Okay. Mr. Moore.
Okay, if we don't look at revenue adjustments, and we do look at the 3% raise, what's the hole we're trying to fill here? What's the dollar?
About 2.8
Okay.
without the central office.
So I'm still uncomfortable, and I know others may disagree, of just pulling that out entirely. I still think whether it be, and I don't know which parts of it, but I think some of those are going to have to, I'll get to that in a minute. If I pull out the two that Ms. Morency and I were talking about earlier about the fund balance issues on the budget revisions page, what I get the top half of that page to come to is 1,373. And I think what and then the bottom would be the key functions, the positions that apply towards the keys. And I would say leave those in. So what I'm thinking is, if I'm understanding the math correctly, is the 2.8 minus the 1,373 you guys would have to figure out how to come up with the rest of that. Is that what you were suggesting, Mr. Bates?
Well, no, I wasn't suggesting, I mean, we can make that suggestion, but that would seem to be a pretty big ask. I was suggesting that we would take those cuts out on the GP, and that could be adjusted a little bit. We would increase our revenue by what we already know the county said that for our tax rate next year, it's worth about 200 more thousand what we budgeted. So that's an easy no-brainer, I think, 200,000. And then I think the sales tax, I think if we projected out next year and did a 5% projection, I think it's very conservative. So that would give us about 900,000 more in revenue to work with. So what I was looking at for them to find as far as savings would be to try to cover the 600,000. And I was thinking that maybe about half of that, we may go back and look at the sales tax and maybe adjust that up by another 300,000. And then we would tell them to find another 300,000 in cuts out of the GP. Since they've already made almost 1.5 million in cuts.
1.4.
I mean, maybe 1.445. Well, it depends. Yeah, if you take those items out. So, I mean, we could ask them to do that. That seems to be maybe, I'm good with pushing it, but are we kind of like getting really close to the bone on things? I don't know.
And we won't know until we go back to the well and see if we can find another 300,000. So that would be a statement for Thursday night. Because what I don't think you want to do is you don't want to impact services. You know, we don't want psychologists not to be able to travel around the county. We don't want things like that to happen. So it's hard to say offhand what those would be. We'd have to go deep and look, and bring those back Thursday night.
And what I was going to suggest on the central office, I think that was 130,000. What I was going to suggest is that we would do 50% of what they've proposed instead of the full 130,000. That was my thought. So that we're doing something, but then we can have that more comprehensive look before we jump in the full deep end of the pool. Mr. Phoenix.
I don't know if it's legal or not, but could we put the central office raises off until after budget, and then talk about the central office raises and maybe take that out of fund balance? And I know that's going to become a reoccurring expense, but that'd be one way to get past it in this budget session.
Another possibility too is, I know that we've cut a position in our finance office, correct?
2 if we outsource the subs.
So has our budget already been reduced by that amount, or would it be possible if we are making a reduction of positions that we could look at making a budget transfer from one line item to another line item? In other words, we've eliminated some positions, so that's freed up some funding to be able to look at the CFO position.
Yeah, we could move that budget line item to someplace else because they are currently still in there.
So that may be one way of trying to figure out that particular position. And we've got other positions that was in that as well. But
And another possibility is outsource payroll and finance to VACO. No salaries, no benefits. We just outsource CFO. We also outsource the lead accountant that's working with all of the bookkeepers and maintaining all the school budgets, and then also have a little bit of cushion there for special projects where VACO would need to pull in an account tech from time to time to do some extra work. For example, we just found out last week that the auditors were starting to do some work on balancing our books with the county trustee, and they were just told, well, you've got to stop doing that. You can't do that anymore. That could become a conflict of interest. So that means that we now have to do that. So do we pull somebody off a job to do that that's normally doing something else? Do we pull in a $35 an hour person from VACO that takes that job on, that's all they're dedicated to for 2 weeks? That's a possibility as well. It's just, let's outsource that work. Just have VACO take it on for us.
Ms. Kinzer.
How much, I don't remember, I've got so many notes, how much money did we lose in BEP because of at risk?
It's about 744,000.
$744,000, which next year may come back to us. That's a one-time sort of thing. I realize that, but that's something you ought to consider taking out of fund balance.
We got to push our parents to apply for food stamps.
And really put us on making sure they apply for those, fill out those papers, free and reduced. We really shouldn't have lost that.
No.
That's 700 and what?
We lost it because the state changed the classification for at-risk. They no longer take the forms from school systems. It's how many parents actually apply for food stamps on the state level. So we have to tell our parents, please, even if you're not going to use them, apply for them, please, because that impacts our funding from the state.
Well, I think you would have, well, you've got precedent, it was done before, but I think you could take those funds from fund balance. I think you would be justified in doing that. And then try and really stay on this and try to get those funds back next year. It wouldn't necessarily be a reoccurring.
Well, I'm not sure I'm following. So we got $744,000 less from the state because of that. I don't think we would necessarily take that out of fund balance or anything, but I guess what you're saying is in the future, maybe in the next fiscal year, we may see that $744.
Replacing it from fund balance, so.
Yeah.
By just replace it. Yes, I'm talking about taking it out, yeah. Monies we can probably work to restore, but put them back in. I mean, we've got the same students, we've got the same everything. It's just that.
All right, so you're saying to do the $600,000 fix, you would be potentially looking at taking that as a one-time draw out of fund balance.
Right, and it was done in 2006 for the same reason.
We call that plugging a hole.
Yeah.
With the thought process that, yes, you don't like to do things that are being of a current nature, but if whatever is addressed from those application standpoint, that funding should be there next year.
Should be there, should have been there
Shouldn't be
anyway.
a continuing whole.
I think we are being into, I'm not going to say, you're not going to say it, I'll say it. I think it's clear that our by the fact that we have schools that are shifting out of the title status, we can't count on that just always being here. The county is changing in demographics, and I think that's a reality. So you can't just assume that because we lost it this year, we can get it back.
And is that necessarily a bad thing?
I don't
think
it is.
I think that shows that our county is becoming more prosperous.
It is a financial thing we're going to have to deal with long-term over the next so many years as we continue to see these changes.
That's a good point.
Well, the at-risk classification is affecting every county in the state because of that switching from, what used to happen is we used to send home Title I forms. Parents would say, yes, I'm below the poverty line, this is how much I make. We would organize all that paperwork and send it into the state, and that would determine our at-risk funding. They've gotten rid of that process altogether. Now they're just going with how many parents apply for food stamps inside your county. And so with us losing free and reduced lunch, I don't know if that's going to come back. You never know what the future holds. But that's why it's different this year. It's a change in state law that affected us.
So you would say no on using any fund balance to try to make this work? Ms. Parker?
Mount Pleasant's going to be running out of land, and they're going to be coming this way. Eventually, someday, maybe in my lifetime, they'll make a decent shopping center here in this area. And that'll bring in more employment, more people. So we're moving up, and the wages are going up, so you're not going to have as many people below poverty level anymore. And you're going to have a lot of families that just because of pride will not apply for food stamps unless we encourage them to do so, like you said.
Ms. Parker?
You mentioned the possibility of outsourcing finances to VACO and having some savings there as far as benefits and whatnot. Are there any other positions in central office that we could outsource?
I don't know. Buses, We outsource buses in Oak Ridge. I've never heard of a school district outsourcing curriculum and instruction. Do what? Officially, yeah. I've never heard of a school system doing that. I'd have to look and really see what's out there. That's a tough question. I don't really know that offhand. That's a tough one. That's a good question, though.
All right.
Outsource what? Nurses. Outsource nurses.
All right, so let's see if we can maybe get, it's getting about 20 minutes till 9. I'd like to get us out of here by 9 o'clock is just a goal maybe. I don't know if we can do it or not. But let's go ahead and go in committee and let's see if we can get some work done. Okay? So I don't know if we have the video. I guess you all have been running the video. So, okay. All right, so I want to welcome everyone to the May 16, 2017 meeting, Budget Committee meeting of the Maury County Board of Education. If the minutes can reflect that we have Ms. Parker, Mr. Pennings, Mr. Moore, I am present, and Ms. Powers is present. And then if the minutes can reflect that Mr. Dudley was here for the work session, but he's no longer present. And then we also have board members, Mr. Beaver, Ms. Morenzi, and Ms. Kinzer that are also present. So we do have a quorum. We can do business as a committee. You all received a proposed agenda prior to today's meeting. Is there a motion? Is there any changes? If not, is there a motion to approve? All right, got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we will vote on that. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 5-0. Moving on to minutes. You all received a set of the draft minutes. Are there any changes? If not, is there a motion approved? Motion by Mr. Moore. Second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so the motion does pass on a vote of 5-0. Moving on to new business, looking at, of course, we just got done with having a work session looking at our GP budget. I know we've had a lot of discussion. I think some of the things we're going to have to make some decisions on. Right now, what we've currently what's been brought to us is from the superintendent's office would be a budget of $99,520,753. That would be the expenditure, and that would include a 2% raise as well as all of the items in the green column of the Keys budget, correct? All right, so one of the things we've got to determine is, are we as a committee, do we want to increase the 2% raise to a 3% raise? And so I know we've already had some discussion, so is there a motion to increase that from 2% to 3%?
I make a motion to increase it to 3% increase, please.
All right, so that's motion by Mr. Pennings, second by Ms. Parker. Any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none, we're ready to vote.
And this is for all full-time employees with the exception of
food service and the superintendent, and that's, and part-time.
Right, full-time equivalent.
Okay.
You may vote now.
I vote yes. Let's vote. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 5-0. The next thing that we've got to make a decision on is the central office salaries. I think the original proposal that came to us back in April had some adjustments, which the total amount was around $130,000. Is that correct, Mr. Parliament?
Yes.
Okay. And so we've had some discussion on that, whether to include those adjustments in this year's budget or not to include it. So let me open the floor for discussion or any motions. Mr. Pennings.
Make a motion to hold off the central office raises and go back to this budget time and then discuss that if need be take it up on that.
Okay. So we got a motion by Mr. Pennings. Is there a second? All right, got a second by Mr. Moore. I think I want to get some input of the superintendent's office, since you all had made that original proposal. Is that something that, I guess I like the idea of maybe us taking a look at those budgets, and maybe there's some, maybe we've freed up some income in some of the line items, and we can maybe make some adjustments in the future on that. But are these some critical things that we need to be looking at now rather than later?
Well, I bring to you guys recommendations on what I think is going to make this school system strong. That's the recommendations for the keys, recommendations for GP, such and so forth. So with these salary fixes, that is my recommendation in order to make those positions stronger, to either retain them or attract people of that same skill level. Recent report came out from oh gosh, I'm going blank now. Oh, it was a financial magazine. I'll get it if anybody wants it, but says if you lose a position, you can go ahead and count on losing 50% of that salary in human capital, because you then have to repost, you've got to retrain, and then you get to give that person the time to get back up to the skill level that you hope that their previous person held. So to me, retaining those positions is extremely important, but I'm also telling you guys that the salary fixes that I'm talking about will be, if we do lose somebody, that position will become that much more attractive to potential candidates.
And I understand, and I think your recommendations and your input is well taken. I guess what I'm looking at is now or later. Is there an urgency that we need to go ahead and do this now, or is there some flexibility in time when we could study the budgets a little bit closer, maybe even in the June or July timeframe about making some adjustments?
I wouldn't take this past out fall break. So we do have a little bit of time to look at it. We do have some time to talk about it, possibly look at, once we close the books, where we're at, what's coming in. But I would recommend that these salary adjustments be made at or before fall break.
Okay. Mr. Moore and then Ms. Powers.
Okay, I got a couple of things on that. And I guess Mr. Bates was getting to that. Are we at risk of losing any of our current employees?
Yes.
Because if this doesn't go through?
Some of our employees have turned down jobs, similar jobs, making more money. They've turned them down.
Okay.
It's going to come to a point where they're going to stop turning them down.
That are included in this batch of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The other thing I would say that were we to go ahead and do this now, I would have a problem if because some of these are some considerable jumps.
Yes.
Having them included in the 3% raise, that seems to be kind of a double dip if it were to go through now.
Good point.
The problem I've got with I know Mr. Bates earlier in discussion, I guess that was in our work session, had just thrown out a number of approving 50% of that. The problem I have with that is I have no basis personally for whether 50% or 150% of what you asked for is appropriate.
Yeah.
I simply don't. I could say that I don't like them because of other things that have gone on in the recent months or recent year based on other pieces of the puzzle. But that really is just me not being happy about the big picture of everything. So personally, I would still like to see us get these approved based on the director's recommendations. That said, with the same, as we discussed earlier about the fact that we, on the steps, the 5-year, 10-year, 15-year on the regular employees, the fact that we still don't have a comprehensive study of what those are, it still looks to me like that the central office staff is not been comprehensively put together either. The numbers are all over the place. And my biggest fear is the same one I had with what we talked about when we were just adding to just changing the certain levels of the teaching raises or the teaching salaries, was that we're doing this piecemeal and we may piecemeal it wrong. So that's the struggle I have. And while I understand that your concerns that we need to make sure we keep or retain certain positions, we have to be careful with that because I think there may be we may be able to get a better person in there for less money. That is a reality. Again, that's nothing personal against anyone that's in those positions, but that's the reality of what it may be. And that's where I go back to what I just said a second ago, where I start to have problems with piecemealing salaries to fit people or somebody that we see immediately right now. That starts to make me wonder because, again, I think I've talked about this before. If we're going to go up in price, I have to look at what am I getting for that. And if we're talking about market prices now or what the market may bear for that price, I may have to go out and look and say, well, maybe there's somebody else on the market that would actually fit that better than what we have now. Because that's kind of the two sides of when you start talking about upping the pay. And that's what I personally would look at in my business role. So I think so I can't say that I'm just have to have that person. If we're looking at changing the salary structure for that one position, I have to go out and look and see maybe there's somebody else out there that would actually give me a better product for that new salary. So that's where I still struggle with that as well. So I think that's enough for my where I'm at.
If it's all or nothing, I agree. I don't want any central office raises given right now. There are a couple in there that I do feel like maybe there is more urgency than others, but I don't really know how to go about breaking that out. I do agree that the size of our budget, someone making $70,000 a year, that doesn't seem to fit. I don't know. 125 sounds pretty reasonable, but maybe you mentioned it doesn't need to be quite that high. I kind of have a priority list on those, but I don't really know if we just want to, based on principle, say none right now. But I do think it's something that on a couple of them we do need to talk about it.
Ms. Barker.
I'm just looking at what TSBA says our duties are. And specifically, they said that the legislature has specified the following mandatory duties, specifically with regards to employment. The board has the duty to employ the superintendent, set salaries for employees, grant tenure, approve evaluation plans for employees, and hold dismissal hearings when necessary. The problem I have with these increases are that they're not consistent with the salary schedule that we as a board, now I wasn't on the board at the time, but we as a board set for these positions. And if we're not following our own policies, then I'm going to have a real hard time having a policy manual. I mean, we've spent 2 years going through a policy manual, and I know that particular component is not in our policy manual, but it was adopted by the board, and it should have been followed. And if it hasn't been followed, that's not my fault as a board member. And I'm not going to give somebody liberty to violate policy and then at another time say I want somebody to have their foot held to the fire because they need to follow policy. I think if it's important to look at these positions, then our superintendent will make it a high priority to bring it back to us before fall and let us have a comprehensive look. But I don't want to look at the individual in the position, because if I start looking at the individual in the position, it gets personal. These aren't personal positions. These are positions for who can move us forward as a school district. And so I want to know what the position brings, and I want to know what the value that's brought is. And, personally, the way the salary schedule is currently set up, I don't think that there are some positions that there's value brought to having an education degree. I don't. I don't think there's value to having a master's degree. I think I can get the same thing with somebody having a different degree. So I don't want us to lock ourselves in like we have, but right now that's all we have. So that's what I would prefer to go with. And I guess as far as financial goes, because I know that that is probably the position that we feel like we need to make an investment in, and I don't disagree with that, but I will say that I'm probably leaning more towards outsourcing that at this point, because I don't think that thus far we've ever had anybody inside our office that we felt like we got good numbers from. And I'm saying for the CFO positions that we've hired in the past.
Okay.
I mean, the entire time that I've been on the board, we've always had a different CFO sitting in that seat. And hopefully now the numbers are good, and if Eric's doing a good job, but he's doing it on a contract basis, and the direction that we're going, that I think the county might be going, I just don't think that we need to allocate money towards that position at this point, and maybe just look at outsourcing it until we have more direction from them.
All right. And so the current motion on the table is to basically defer this. We would not include this in currently in the budget to be recommended to the board, but we would come back and the superintendent could bring some additional proposals for us to take a look at a later time. Mr. Pennings?
Yeah, and I've been with 3 different CFOs since I've been on the board. I think, Denny, you've been with 2, right? I don't know if the first one, Mr. Bobo, was good or not, but I know his reporting and everything was right on. We've had some financial ones that you can, as far as I'm concerned, I couldn't even understand what they were reporting on. I like the way he does it. I'm not sure he's the man for the job. I don't care if he's the man for the job or not. He's the man we got here now, and he's doing us a good job. But do you think we are going to lose any critical positions if we say by, I don't know, say July or August, that we will be talking about this? Because to be frank, this is the first time that I can remember that we're really talking about each position or positions at the central office as far as their wages, what they're making.
Well, you approved it in July of 2014.
I know, but I mean, you didn't, it was never talked about in this depth. It never has.
No.
And yes, we've had our problems. Is it problems because the people aren't doing their job? I mean, I just can't believe that there's somebody at the central office that's making, say, $60,000, and just because you raise their salary to $80,000, all of a sudden they're going to start doing a better job. That's just not human nature. If you're going to do a good job, you're going to do a good job whether you're making $40,000 or $80,000, my humble opinion. So I would like to see us put this off, and my question to you, Chris, is do you think we're going to, if we would say we're going to be talking about these salaries in August, that we're in danger of losing some critical people before then?
I don't think we are, because you're establishing a finite time when you're going to talk about it, and waiting another 2 or 3 months is, I think, doable. I don't know what weighs on some people's hearts, so it's hard. That's hard to play. But I would say more often than not, I don't think that is going to be a problem taking us through the summer. I think if the board was unwilling to look at it at all, no, we're not doing it, forget that, I wouldn't feel as confident. But I think because you've established a finite date, I think you're okay. I think we'll be all right.
All right. So seeing no other lights, I think we're ready to vote.
Mm-hmm. 5-0.
All right, so that has not been included in the expenditures. We have included currently at 3%. So, Mr. Parliament, I need you to do some arithmetic and see how bad of a problem do we
We were
have
at
now.
2,924,934.
Give me that one more time.
2,924,934.
I have
Okay.
one more question, Mr. Chairman, if you
Yes.
wouldn't mind. Would the board like to give me some direction on establishing firm talks with VACO concerning outsourcing our finances?
Why don't we come back on that? That's probably going to require some additional discussion, I would think.
So
maybe,
so just continue where we are.
why don't we get that maybe at the next full board meeting? We could have maybe some more discussion on that. I don't
Sure.
want us to get too, we've got some things we got to try to get accomplished tonight. So,
Not a problem.
but certainly I think we can have some additional discussion on that. As far as how we fill this 2.9 million hole, let's look at the expenditure cuts that were proposed to us. I think the total, if we did all the GP items, that was 1,445,000. Is that correct, Mr. Parliament? Roughly. I don't know if you can throw in a
Can I make a
formula
motion
real
on that?
quick. You ready to make a motion?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. What I'm looking for right now is what is going to be taken out in expenditures, and then we're going to come back to see.
Okay, so based on the tab budget revisions, what I came up with was a total of 1,373,000, and that is the total that was presented in the spreadsheet minus the two that were supposed to be shifted to fund balance. I want to leave them as, so those would not be included. 52,818 and the 20,000 removed.
All right,
So my
so,
motion would be for the 1,373.
so the motion that you're going to make, make sure I got it correct. To start whittling down this 2.9, your motion would be to take out these expenditures, proposed cuts, with the exception of the tires and tubes.
Yes.
And the PLC
PD. Yes, sir. For a
And that-
total of 1,373 even.
Okay. All right, so we've got a motion. Is there a second on that motion? All right, got a second by Mr. Pennings. All right, any discussion on that motion? Seeing now we're ready to vote. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 5-0. All right, so Mr. Parliament, maybe you can give us an updated figure as to what we've got to figure out.
1,551,934.
1,551,034.
934.
934. All right, so I think we already probably have some low-hanging fruit with on the revenue side as far as the county property tax. We had budgeted, if I could turn to it. Previously, we had budgeted 21,978,470, and the information that we received today, what the county themselves, what they are estimating, the money that will be generated, assuming they give us the same pennies and they leave the rate the same, would be 22,173,875. So I'll make a motion to amend the revenue side of our budget to increase the current property tax as far as our draft budget to 22,173,875. Is there a second? All right, got a second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so what does that take us to, Mr. Parliament? All right, so we'd had some discussion before about how much to ask central office to go back and make some additional cuts out of GP. We could potentially make some cuts out of the Keys budget. And I think there's also some increases that we could make to the sales tax projections for next year. I don't know if we want to do some sort of combine motion to try to come up with that, or if we want to still take things one piece at a time. But this is kind of where we're down to now. And I think looking at the numbers, Mr. Parliament, can you send that, or maybe just, you got it already up, don't you? All right, so if we did a 5% adjustment for next year above what we did last year on the sales tax, that would be about another 700,000. I'm gonna go ahead and make a motion so we can kind of figure out what is where we're getting down to the bottom line. So I'm gonna make a motion that we increase the local sales tax line on the revenue to $15,685,161, which represents a 5% increase above what our projections are for funding for actual revenue this year. So it's that we're going to have growth in the economy by 5% next year, based upon the historical record that shows that this year it looks like we're going to have about 6.6% increase in revenue. The year before that, we actually had 11.34% increase in that. So that's my motion to adjust that to 15 point. Okay. Got a second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote to 5-0. All right, so this is going to be kind of the nitty-gritty now, Mr. Parliament.
609, 617.
So we were pretty close, 600,000. That's the number to crunch. So we talked before in our work session about maybe doing some sort of combination, maybe asking for central office to go back on the GP and find maybe half of that in additional cuts, and maybe we put another 300,000 on the revenue side. I would probably lean towards putting that on the sales tax side. That's probably not going to adjust that increase by too much over 5%. And I think if we look at the last 5 years, I think it's probably it's much more than 5%. So we could look at that, or we could do all of it on revenue, or we could do all of it on cuts. Mr. Moore, it looks like you got a motion.
I'd make a motion that we ask central office to try to find as much of that as they can for cuts and bring solutions to us on the revenue side for anything they cannot find.
So you're gonna, I guess, we're just gonna leave it at figure out the 609 and come back to us, I guess, probably on Thursday. Either it could be, so they would have some discretion whether they do it all in expenditures or they do it all in revenue, or how.
Is that they find as much in cuts as they can.
And then we'll take up what is left,
Yeah.
if anything.
Mhm.
All right, so
Let me put it in other
your motion
terms.
is to find $609,000.
My motion is to
in
find,
cuts.
yes, thank you. It's to find 609,000 in cuts.
Okay. And that would be out of the GP, not rather than the keys. Okay. Ms. Parker.
I like the direction you're going.
Let me just procedurally, so we've got a motion on the table.
I'll
Is there a
second
second? Okay, so we got a second.
I like the direction that Mr. Moore's going. My only concern is we get this stuff so late that by the time we get it, I don't know that I feel like we can't do anything with it half the time. I mean, we're getting stuff the day of. So, and we're going to have a meeting on Thursday, which essentially leaves you guys Wednesday to get something. Assume that you get it up, and then we have to vote on it on Thursday. We have less than 24 hours probably to look at it. I know it would be a little bit time consuming, but I would kind of like to give some direction though on that, because to be honest with you, some of the cuts that they've proposed, I don't like. It's just I would rather them come up with cuts a different way. But that's just me personally, and I think everybody, if we all went down the line, we're all going to have different priorities. So I don't know.
Well, you can always make a motion to amend if you don't like what's on the table. Yes.
Well, I don't necessarily dislike his motion. I'm just saying, in order for it to be fruitful, what comes back to us on Thursday, I feel like there has to be some parameters in some ways set on that, because otherwise they may come back and say, well, we're going to take half of it from textbooks. And I'm going to be like, heck no. They may say we're going to take half of it from computers. And I'm going to be like, do you have enough Chromebooks? You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of those type of things that, from a priority standpoint for the board, we kind of need to give them some direction. Otherwise, it's going to be a waste of time, what they bring to us.
Mr. Moore.
I guess I could clarify how I would think my motion would be, and I agree with that. If we went down the line on the board here, we would probably all have different areas we would cut, which is why I kind of left it open-ended where I did. But that said, if my motion were to pass, that doesn't stop anyone from immediately afterwards picking a line item out of this budget and saying, let's cut that right now. And then they would have 609 minus whatever line item anyone chooses to cut, were that to pass, and they would have to only come up with that amount. So that's my thinking. And I agree with your thinking that it does give us a short timeline. However, the alternative would be for us to sit here right now, which is what we're doing anyway, and cutting it right now. So we're really, either way, we're doing this off the cuff, I think, in my view. And we're there anyway. I guess that's my thinking. I don't like it either, but I think we're already there.
Yeah, and I guess I don't like it either, but maybe it's a good practical way of going forward, that at least then we'll have something to chew on, and we may then say, no, that's a non-starter, and then we can then kind of figure out if we need to start having the discussion of, okay, there's about 200,000 that maybe we do need to go back to revenue, or maybe we do, then we can start making some priorities at that point. So it may help us to then kind of help to focus and get this finalized.
And again, just to repeat, my intention is to find the entire thing in cuts. That would be my goal. And I didn't want to set a limit on that, because if they find another $800,000, over budgeting in an item, I would like them to go ahead and use all of that, not just apply whatever random percentage we set to it, and then make us have to go back to revenue. I would like to set revenue, if it were me.
That would be my preference too. Okay, so that's the motion. How we currently are going to balance this would be for the superintendent's office to go back and find an additional 609, 617 in cuts to be made out of the GP. Okay. So.
I mean, we can cut tons of stuff out. It's just going to affect services.
Yeah.
So that's what we've got to do, is we've got to figure out what do we cut
But I
out
think
that doesn't negatively impact
but-
services. That's what we've got to figure
But
out.
I think I want you to understand, I think that probably the intent of the motion is not to necessarily go and find the most, where we all then get tied up in knots, like, we're going to cut out, some critical
Oh, of
positions.
course.
It's
Yeah.
it's a good faith effort by y'all's office to go back through, and I appreciate the process that's happened so far. You all have come back, and I think we have to.
It was
to say, in some ways, good job, because they've went back and they found
It took a lot of time to do that.
1.4
Yeah.
that we've cut out of the budget.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fantastic. That's probably not what's going to make the paper. What's going to make the paper is the total amount that we're budgeting, probably. But of course, maybe nothing to make the paper. But anyway, but that's a pretty significant reduction. If you all can make some good, reasonable finds, I think you're going to probably have a very happy board.
We'll do the best we can.
And we understand that too. We having to ask everybody to act within reason, and so, but I think this is a good, reasonable approach to see if maybe we can find some additional cuts to make, because I think this solves both sides of the issue where the superintendent's office has told us what the priorities are. And this allows us to stay focused on those priorities and to solve maybe some other priorities of board members and committee members of let's give a good raise to our employees if we can. So,
Sure.
Mr. Pennings and then Mr. Moore.
And please don't make me vote no on the budget, because cut things out, if you have something that is justified and is going to keep us moving the school forward, I still fall back on what I said before. If we need it, ask for it, fund it.
Well, I'm going to go back to, the reason why you hired me. You hired me to push the school system forward. I'm not going to cut anything out that I think is going to negatively impact the system. But just be aware that if we can't get to that point, we may be bringing some things back to you guys with an explanation of, you do realize that if you go with this, this is what's going to happen. So, no, it's not going to be an arbitrary decision where we're just going to start slashing with a machete. That doesn't solve a problem. So it's going to, just like it was before, it's going to be very well-intentioned, it's going to be very thoughtful, it's going to be very methodical. We're going to spend tomorrow doing this work, because we need to bring to you a thorough, methodical, and well-thought-out, detailed plan. So don't worry about that.
For Thursday, is it possible for y'all to also bring an itemized list of textbooks and instruction materials, what all you're planning on purchasing from those line items, and what grades they're going to go to, and then also devices 3 through 12, if they're all covered in budget?
They aren't currently.
They're
No.
not?
No, have we spent the entire line item on diploma? I think we have. No, no.
Bringing back a final recommendation this next board meeting.
Yeah.
For the final order of laptops that we're getting.
We're almost to expending the entire 1 million. So what we have to do.
So there's no money in this $99.5 million budget for diploma?
No, not at the current time, there isn't, no. So one of the things that we are doing is we're having a diploma meeting this week to determine how many schools and grade levels have been approved, to determine what that number is. And going back to the email that I sent all of you guys today that was sparked by yourself, was looking at possibly earmarking some funds out of fund balance to begin the process to get deploying those devices at the beginning of August. But we don't know what that number is yet, because we haven't had our most recent meeting. That'll be this week.
There's money in this budget for the second year lease payment.
Oh,
Not for any additional.
Yeah, so the $1 million that you reserve, that's our lease payment for the next 3 years on the devices we bought to that point. But any additional, for example, the school systems, or not school systems, but the grade levels or departments that have been approved in the last 2 weeks to go 1-to-1 starting in August, those amounts are not in the budget because we didn't know those amounts at the time.
I guess my question is, if the goal is for us to be 1-to-1, 3 through 12,
Yes.
is that going to be possible next year under this current budget?
If we can earmark the amount of funds that I had mentioned before, we can do it. I don't think by the end of next year, my goal, or what I think is going to happen is roughly by the end of next year, probably 75% of the grades 3 through 12, which is, if we have 9,000 kids roughly on average, probably about 6,500, maybe 1-to-1, and the following will pick up the following year. New teachers coming in, new grade levels.
But these devices, and that's part of my confusion, because these devices follow the kids, right?
Yes,
Not
they do.
necessarily the teacher.
Yes, they do.
So if fourth grade at Mount Pleasant Elementary School got their devices,
Yes.
they go to fifth grade. Fifth grade has a new teacher that wasn't trained on diploma and integrating technology. Those kids are still bringing those laptops into,
Yes, they are.
into
Yes.
that classroom.
Yes.
Okay. Can you still kind of give us an idea of what it's going to be if we were cost-wise to do 3 through 12?
So cost-wise, if we were to do 3 through 12, roughly, we could expect another $3.2 million to cover us, the entire 9,000 devices. We're talking with Lenovo. If we can earmark 3.2 in fund balance, but only spend $1 million, that can get us started on a lease, and we can spread those payments out over time versus having to spend it all up front. So we're talking about some different options that Lenovo's engaged in at this point.
Have you also looked at financing
Yes, we have.
locally as
Yes.
opposed to financing through them?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Right now, currently, Lenovo offers the best rates.
Okay.
So we've also looked at, there's a company called UPD that does the same thing. We're trying to see how competitive they can be with Lenovo. And then there's with UPD, at the end of the lease cycle, there's a parent-student payment option where they can actually buy that device for a discounted cost. So we're exploring multiple things to be able to get more devices into homes, really. We saw that firsthand at Mount Pleasant Elementary School in fourth grade with a dad who's never had an email address. And so his kid walked over, sat down at the computer lab with his dad and signed him up for his first email address he's ever had in his life. If that dad were to have a device that he could interact with at the end of the cycle, I think that would change some of his outcomes.
Sounds good.
No,
Can
we're
we
working
get,
on it.
Can we get the information, though, on the textbooks and the instruction? And I only say that because ever since I've been on the board, textbooks have been something that they talked about at the very first teacher roundtable that we had, that we do not have enough textbooks. And everything I hear about us going from block to period is that we're going to need even more textbooks. And it seems like we're cutting that line item and not adding to it. And I'm waiting for that explosion to happen, and I don't want to see us increase all this revenue and be in a predicament where we are right back to having a whole bunch of disgruntled parents.
So can you state exactly what you want to see on Thursday?
I want to see textbook and instruction, what resources those are going towards. Classes, like as far as grade level.
You want textbook counts per class, per grade level, per school?
Not necessarily, I mean, what we're going to be purchasing and what.
Okay.
I mean, I assume that you're going to purchase enough to cover.
Of course.
So I'm just looking to see what we're.
Yeah. And you did see the email today talking about the K through 2 resources. We're bringing teachers in the summer.
I did. And again, though, in the summer, that doesn't do me any good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, that's the conversation that should have been going on all year.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to, I'm going to be very hesitant to approve any budget that is not going to already have K through 2 resources already included. So that's my main concern, to be completely frank with you, because we're talking about devices for 3 through 12. And
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that they still have the resources that they need.
Because one of the things, going back to the email today, that instruction wants to do is, what current resources do we have at the K through 2 level that maybe is not being utilized?
Right.
Because we want to find, especially with math manipulatives.
Right.
You know, are there manipulatives that could be utilized that maybe even teachers don't even know
Right.
are there? And then we make that available, because we would feel it wouldn't be fiscally responsible to come to you guys and say, we want to spend $300,000 on math manipulatives when we already have math manipulatives that could be used. So that we've got to get down to that granular level. We got to
Right.
dig in, get our hands dirty.
I'm going to try to get us back to the motion real quick in a moment.
Sorry.
And
Good
I think it's a
conversation.
good discussion, and I think it's very good
I
to
do
get
just
this
want to say
additional.
that you've
yeah.
got to be careful though on some of those things, I think, because a lot
Sure.
of those manipulatives may have been purchased with title funds.
Yes,
So
true.
you can't necessarily transfer those to
No.
Marvin Wright.
True.
To fill a void.
True.
So I want
if
to make sure that those kids have what they need.
But if
even
Marvin
though-
Wright needs math manipulatives, if we can't find any, then yeah, we definitely need to get some.
Correct.
That's
Exactly.
where we're
That's
going.
what I'm saying.
Not a problem.
Yes.
All right, so the current motion that we have is to, by Mr. Moore, is to direct the superintendent's office to find an additional 609, 617 in cuts out of the GP.
Okay.
And we've got a second. Any more discussion on that particular motion? All right, seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, that motion does pass on a vote to 5-0. So, Mr. Parliament, do we have a balanced budget right now?
We do.
If you all are able to come back and find those cuts, that's a big if. Yeah, y'all got to do some work. Okay, so we've got something to for the committee to propose to the board. I think we've kind of taken, I thought that we might just take a full kind of a wraparound motion for everything that's been done to present to the board as the recommended GP budget. We probably do need a motion on that. So based upon the parameters that we've set forth, do we have a motion to make the recommendation to the board as far as our GP, based upon what has been made, the action that's been taken thus far? All right, so we got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on that motion?
Question.
Yes, Ms. Parker.
Does that include the fund balance number that's on our keys?
No, we're going to have to come back to that, so,
Okay.
on GP. All right. Yes. I vote. All right, so going back to our keys budget, the items that would be taken out of fund balance. Mr. Moore, I guess you had started the process about maybe making the suggestion of moving some of those things from the gray column into the pink column to be funded. And so we got two different alternatives, I think, that's part of our packet. The first alternative, what was originally presented by the superintendent's office, would be to utilize $3,440,479 from fund balance towards these key items. Mr. Moore, you had requested that we go back through the gray column and look and see what the cost would be if we moved non-employment type things over into the pink column. And I think that would increase that to $3,923,924.
Actually, I noticed one thing that needs to be shifted.
Okay.
Hampshire pre-K person is still sitting in the gray, but Hampshire pre-K supplies have been moved over to the pink. That needs to be moved back to the
So that would
gray.
be taken
because
out.
that's assigned to a position, yeah. So we actually need to reduce that amount.
So what would that adjusted number be if we
Where
move
was
the
that?
things from the gray into the pink?
I'm looking for it. That's moving $60,000 out.
So what would the bottom line be?
Looks to me like the bottom line is now 3,863,924.
All right, so that's what would take if we move those gray.
Hold on a second, no. 3,923,924.
Well, that's what I'm showing already.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I've got the change of 60,000. Okay. Yeah, total budget target overage is 3863924. Sorry.
Okay. All right, so we've got that in front of us, so I'm going to open the floor, any discussion, or is there a motion to formally move those items from the gray into the pink? All right, so we got a motion by Mr. Pennings, second by Mr. Moore. All right, any discussion on that motion? Yes, Mr.
Some of these
Superintendent.
things on this list will not be able to be quantified, like headphones. There's no way that we can quantify that headphones make an improvement in mathematics. So some of these things, we won't be able to do that, but we'll be able to quantify as many as we possibly can to determine that they made improvement with that key.
Okay. And I guess, Mr. Moore, we've had this discussion, I guess, of the process of, I guess these particular schools made these requests, but then they came to you all and sat down and y'all looked at what would be an impact, maybe what wouldn't make as big of an impact. And so you all made the recommendation as far as what to put over into the pink or the blue columns. What we're seeing in the light blue and the yellow are things that I guess didn't make the cut. I guess, do you, since you all left them in the blue, do you feel that these are items that should be in the pink? Will they help to further some of those items?
Some of these are people positions, so I wouldn't recommend moving those over to fund balance. Just moving down the list.
But like some of these things like art supplies and then level
Yeah.
readers, RTI supplies, I
Yeah.
mean, these are things that were not in the pink and now they would be brought into the pink.
And
So,
if they can be quantified, we'll quantify them. Yeah.
So these would be things that the schools have asked for that would actually help within those schools.
Yes.
Do you feel? Okay.
Yes.
That's all clarification I need. Mr. Moore.
And I just wanted to kind of go back over that real quick. When I had asked this, my thinking was, with a budget of this size, that we're talking about moving some of these things, moving our kids ahead by hitting these keys, was that it seemed crazy that we couldn't come up with just a couple $100,000 spread out over the entire district to be able to move some of these things. That was my thinking. And I do understand that these are kind of the lower level, things that didn't make the cut, so to speak. But I do believe, and I think you just touched on that, Mr. Superintendent, that part of the reason some of these didn't make the cut was because they can't be quantified, or they're very difficult to quantify. So it's not that they're not good things, or it's not that you guys didn't sit around in your discussions and say, well, this is a good thing. It's just that we have no way to track it. And I know one of your goals in this entire key process was to be able to bring us things that you felt like you could quantify, that we were getting measurable results. So again, my thinking was, some of these things, when you look at the whole number, it does start to get up. But some of these things were very small things that I think, and in my mind, along with teacher raises, some of these things seemed like small things that we could really impact some of these classrooms. Now, I could probably start picking them apart personally, and start trying to tear them apart, but I didn't want to do that, which is why I said move them all. It just seems like some of these things are going to be hitting home. They are going to have a real impact in multiple classrooms spread out across our entire district. And I think that's, if we want to make an impact, can we do this every year? No. But I really think like this is something that, I think this is something that in classrooms at every school around our system, there's going to be an impact by some of these items. And I think it'll help move the ball down the field for what we're trying to get across the board.
What you did last year is, and that's what like Dr. Preninger is developing those 3 infographics to show you the growth that's already been made with the keys. So you'll see that soon.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Oh, yes. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote to 5-0. So that takes our, in the pink column, up to, yes, I'm sorry. Oh. All right, so what's the vote?
1 no, 1, 2, 3, 4 yes.
All right, so 4-1, that motion does pass. All right, so moving on, I had made just thinking out loud of some possibilities of how to utilize our fund balance, and I had made the suggestion and asked for some additional information if we wanted to ramp up our painting schedule. And I talked about that a little bit more previously, but basically I think EMG had given us a paint schedule where we'll rotate every 7 years. We will repaint all the schools. But one of the things that what I was thinking is that's with the assumption if we were already had some sort of schedule, like we were starting from zero. And it just seems like some of our schools, you know, they may have not been painted for 20 years. And so do we want to look at maybe using some of our fund balance to try to kind of escalate that and get caught up quicker rather than just staying with the 7-year rotation? It may be that committee members and board members want to just stick with the current schedule, but that was one of the things I did ask to take a look at. And I think in your packet, you all will have seen that I think the total cost, Mr. Probably, you may be able to pull that up. So what I asked Mr. Breed's office to look at is what would be the cost if we ramped up and tried to get everything caught up in 2 years, or what if we did it more spread out over 3 years? And I think, Mr. Breed, I guess on the current schedule, we've got 2 schools that are in line, the rotation schedule to be painted, but if we did 3 years, we would be adding Mount Pleasant, College Hill, Marvin Wright, Hampshire, and Withorn to that schedule, which would increase, let's see, for this year, what we would have to have is 582. Is that, am I looking at that right?
That's correct, yeah. All I did was just go down the list and roll
And just
them up.
add some more, what was next on the list. And then if we did a 2-year, if we did it in a more, in a quicker schedule, that would mean our cost this year would be a total of $784,969. So anyway, I'm sorry, Mr. Breed.
Well, I just assumed each year being able to do a couple of things in-house with hiring summer help, and figured half the cost that EMG estimated and then use their estimate, assuming that the rest of it would have to be contracted out.
Right.
We wouldn't be able to do that much.
Okay.
in-house.
All right, so anyway, that's just, again, me just kind of thinking out loud. I don't know, I'd love to get some input from some of the other members as to whether they just want to leave things as is or look at possibly adding that. Mr. Moore.
I'd like to see us do this, one of them. I think as far as having an impact across the district, I think it would make a really nice impact to show that we're trying to put some time and effort into all of our schools. I know some of it's a visible thing, but as we visit the schools, I've noticed, like you said, some of the schools look like they haven't been painted in quite a while. And I think the 2 that are in front of us here, the painting and the one we haven't spoken about yet, but the landscape, I think those 2 would have a really nice visual impact if we can get those done quickly and make it just looks good. Everybody likes going to a place that looks nice, and I think that would make a big difference.
I make a motion to do the 2-year painting schedule.
All right, and so with that motion, if we did the 2-year painting schedule, what we would need to increase our fund balance, use of fund balance, would be $784,969, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we got a motion by Mr. Pennings and a second by Mr. Moore. Okay, so I'm open the floor for discussion. Ms. Parker.
You know, I know everybody feels like our fund balance is fairly healthy. I hope it continues to be that way. But I don't really see a need to paint some of these buildings. with the HVAC and roofing issues that we have. And I think that the costs for those have not been covered. And so I have a really hard time allocating $750,000 to potentially a building that has massive roof problems or massive HVAC problems that are going to leak and cause other issues. I just think that we have to, I like nice shiny new things too, but I think we have to prioritize what we're spending our money on, and it's much more important to me that our roofs and our HVAC are up to par before I start worrying about painting. And if we can get that stuff caught up, hopefully we'll still have fund balance that we could do this potentially at an expedited rate, but I don't feel like we're there on those other items.
Any other discussion on that motion? Yes, Ms. Powers.
You know, I am good to put some money towards painting some of these schools, but I think there's been success when you've had like community days in schools where people come out and paint. I've painted one of our schools, and you know, I had a lot of fun doing it. But I know Whitthorne did a kind of community day, so I think we should earmark the money, but I would hope that maybe we don't need to draw as much out of our fund balance if we give opportunities for the schools to promote, you know, volunteerism and have them people into the school to try to paint and much, you know, for free, aside from the materials.
Mr. Pennings.
I agree with what Ms. Powers said. I mean, just because we're allocating it doesn't mean we're going to spend it all. If we can get parent involvement and community involvement to help paint, because we allocated it doesn't mean we have to spend it all, and I hope we don't spend it all.
And this just goes back to really, this is a problem we inherited. I mean, when you think about it, we shouldn't be talking about trying to get caught up on some schools that may have not been painted for 20 years. I mean, that's just astounding to me that that's even a problem. And so this is just one of those things that, you know, here we've inherited this. What are we going to do about it? And I definitely, you know, I have those same concerns about, you know, spending the money. It is roughly per school, you know, it's around, you know, maybe average 50,000 or so. And it just seems like, when I'm trying to think of like ways you can spend money that can make a huge impact, to me, a fresh coat of paint can just make an astounding difference to any building. Even when maybe there are a lot of other problems, but just a fresh coat of paint can just it just seems to make a world of difference to just the environment and just the feeling of the building. And that's one of those things I just don't, I understand that, it's just that I think it impacts the students and the teachers. I think if they have a cleaner building, a well-kept building, a lot of people just feel better about going to work, you know, and students feel better about learning in their environment, just the appearance of things. So I think this is just could make a huge impact to all of our schools if this is something that the committee and the board wants to do. So if there's no other discussion on the motion, we'll take the vote. So that motion passes on a vote of 4-1. The last item that I had submitted is when the superintendent was first hired, he had come to us with a proposed landscaping budget for each one of the schools, and I think it was, Mr. Breeden, is it $7,500 per school? And so I guess I kind of dusted that off. I know that something that got proposed and we didn't fund before, but the more I visiting the schools, the more maybe I regretted not funding that before, because I think it kind of goes back into the painting, just the appearance of the inside of the schools, and then having some landscaping on the outside can make an impact as well. And so I got with Mr. Breeden, he got me the information. I think I forwarded that to everyone. A lot of this we do have now, I guess Mr. Breeden, maybe you can update us. We have a landscaper or a full-time position that that would be able to kind of help to maintain the landscaping, but you're still going to have a lot of cost of buying mulch and things like that at the schools. And maybe this is a good way to partner with PTSOs and things like that to get some community involvement, but they shouldn't necessarily have to fund that out of pocket. And so maybe there's some funding that would be provided at each one of the schools to have some budgeting so that they could work on being able to buy things in the spring and in the fall. So that was just a thought process. Mr. Moore. All right, so we got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Okay, any discussion on that particular motion? And the total amount, Mr. Breeden, if we added a 7,500 to, would it be, okay, 165,000, which would be added to our pink column. All right. Yes, Ms. Powers.
I think Mr. Moore might.
I don't care. I only want to say one thing. I actually, even though I made the motion, if it were my preference, this would come out of our regular budget, because again, this is something that we should be looking at every year. This is a real cost. I mean, I understand, and I think Ms. Powers brought up earlier, that we definitely would like to try to continue to get help from parents and any other party that wants to help with it. But the reality is the landscaping around our schools is a part of the school. Just like we're shifting towards, we're actually putting playgrounds into elementary schools instead of just building a school and saying, oh, we'll figure that out later. I think these are the kind of things that we need to be looking at to get accurate budgeting from now on. We need to be including in what we do annually, because these are real costs and we can't just forget about them.
Again, I'm in favor of doing things for aesthetics and community perception, and but I do question. I hope that we're just going to apply logic, because I mean, I know an Eagle Scout just redid here, and Brown. I know Brown was done by an Eagle Scout. I'm not sure every single school needs this. It's an ongoing. I think we do need to allocate money, but I just want to be sure that we're applying logic, and where we can benefit again from community support, we do. But to allocate money, as long as we pinch those pennies.
Mr. Pennings.
Yeah, Mr. Braden, you say 7,500 per school, but are you just giving that to the schools and the principal handles it, or are you taking care of it?
What we would do is we would work with each school to try to help them develop a plan for how they would spend the money, and then let them see if they could recruit the help to do it. Because, as Mr. Bates said, we do not have the staff to go out and do that. Now, in some schools, if they didn't, we could possibly bid out the work to see if we could find a local landscaping company to do that. But we would try to work with each school to help them put their plan together.
Yeah, because what can be just a nice looking school, as far as the landscaping could go, you can get a fanatic that you would, I hope you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we want to get something we can maintain, because again, you could put something in that would take more work to keep maintained than you could probably spend the $7,500 up front for. So we would try to work with them on that. And it would, it obviously would be a pretty good upfront project just to get that coordinated, but I think we can make that happen.
Thank you.
And if I could clarify on that too, I guess my thinking was, and maybe I was incorrect, my thinking with this was that we weren't giving each school $7,500. My thinking was that we were giving the department a sum total to stretch as far as we could to do an appropriate job of landscaping at the school with the assistance of the school. Because I agree, there's some schools that currently have some partners that are helping them. They already have a better landscaping setting than other schools do. Again, we may have to spend more than $7,500 on one school to get them up to just what we would consider the basics. And others may not have to spend anything at all. I mean, my intention, again, was for the department to continue, as you've done with other things, to stretch that $165,000 as far as possible to get the best for our entire district. That was the thinking. So you're shaking your head, so I'm assuming that's where y'all are going with it as well.
Ms. Parker.
I was just saying, Mr. Moore, I actually feel a little bit differently on that one, because if somebody already has people that are vested in maintaining their school, I honestly would rather see them get more money in some ways. If they've got people that are committed to maintaining it and they've already shown a commitment to that, I don't want to punish them because they've already had people that have stepped up and say, well, you don't get 7,500, you only get 2,500. But over here, you haven't done anything and it looks really bad, so we're going to give you 10,000. I hope that and I trust the office to be judicious, but I just want to encourage that participation and reward those schools that have shown an active interest in maintaining their facilities and their landscaping that currently exists.
And I agree with that. I think if are some groups that are already stepping up the plate to help their schools, this could be just an additional infusion. They may go crazy, like, it's the backyard yard crashers or something, I mean, it's something fantastic if they've got a little funding, they're not having to spend so much out of pocket, and they can, get creative with things. So more power to them, I would say, Mr. Penix.
Well, I agree with what she's saying, but I also rely on Mr. Breeden's common sense and the way he's handled things in the past. And I just don't want to see each school handed $7,500 because, like David said, some schools may not need it right now. Some school may need $10,000 to get up to what another school that has been judicious and had other people help them where they are right now. So, to just hand each school $7,500 just doesn't,
And the difference too, some of the schools, high schools, especially in unit schools, have programs, agricultural programs that have been involved in this. You don't have those at elementary schools. You don't have those at middle schools. So sometimes they don't have the input from like Hampshire, for instance. Their ag classes put a lot of work into a lot of they have some great landscaping in front of Hampshire School. They've got some areas. I was there the other day, and the building operator needs some mulch to mulch an area out front. This gives us an opportunity to do some of those kind of things. But then you go to an elementary school, sometimes they don't have those resources unless they can recruit community support. And some schools have it and some schools don't. Now, I'm not sure I can tell you why some get it better than others, but they don't.
Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. How about yes? Sorry. All right, so that motion does pass. All right, so, Mr. Parliament, have you been taking notes? How does that affect what our, so we've added Mr. Moore's request on the moving the gray items. We've added the funding for the painting schedule.
That takes it up to $4,813,893.
Okay. And your current projections as far as available fund balance after the close of June 30th is currently around 9.5.
Around $9.5 million.
Okay.
As of April 30th projection.
Okay. All right. So with that, are there any other changes to the pink column? If not, is there a motion to make that recommendation to the board for Thursday? All right. Got a motion by Mr. Pennings. All right, second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. My vote is yes. All right. So that motion passes. So I think that completes our work. I just want to just briefly note before I let you all out. So on Thursday, we'll have a short budget committee meeting just to approve the minutes as a formality. And then we will go into a special call meeting, and all board members will have an opportunity to go over all of this all over again. Or if everyone is satisfied with the budget committee's recommendations, then it'll be pretty quick. Now, we're also asking for some additional information from the superintendent. If anybody wants any other information, by all means, please reach out to his office prior to Thursday. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn? All right, motion by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion does carry.